Chapter 647. Lai Junchen's proud and arrogant laughter spread to the second carriage. A beautiful young woman with a slender waist and fair skin couldn't help but turn pale. She was really afraid of this devil's laughter. This beautiful young woman looked extremely dignified and intelligent, but she was not Mrs. Wang from the Wang family of Taiyuan. A pair of white hands reached out and gently held her hands. The young woman's body trembled, and she turned her head pitifully. It was Mrs. Wang of Taiyuan sitting next to her with a face full of concern. "Yenji, don't be afraid. He is like this. As long as you are docile, he won't abuse you." Madame Wang comforted her in a gentle voice. The beautiful young woman lowered her head when she heard this, and 2 streams of tears rolled down her cheeks. This beautiful young woman's surname was Xiao Yenji. She was the wife of Xia Yilong, the military advisor of Tongzhou. After Lai Junchen was demoted to Tongzhou, he still didn't change his habit of loving beautiful young women. When he accidentally saw Xia Yilong's wife, he immediately coveted her. When Lai Junchen came to Tongzhou, he held the post of military advisor. In a prefecture's territory, the merit officer was in charge of military affairs, finance, criminal law, farmland, household grain, and other kinds of affairs. In prefectures without a sima, the record officer was in charge of the assistant prefectural governor, in charge of supervising the merit officer. In the Tang dynasty, the military advisor was far less important than in the Han dynasty and gradually became an empty title. Therefore, among all the military advisor Xia had the least power. But even if his position was lower than Lai Junchen's, he couldn't let Lai Junchen kidnap his wife. Lai Junchen used the same trick again. Since he took office, the first thing he did was to find fault with military advisor Xia. Military advisor Xia didn't know how he had offended him. His position was originally a dispensable one that no one cared about, but military advisor Xia didn't let him go. How could all the officials be clean? Military advisor Xia's position was not as rich as others, and he didn't have as much power as others. He had done a few things for others, so it was hard to say that he was secretive. Finally, Lai Junchen had something on him. With this evidence, although Lai Junchen couldn't kill him, he could report it to the provincial governor and have him removed from office and exiled to the border. With the evidence in hand, Lai Junchen decided to lay his cards on the table with Adjunct Xia. Finally, on a summer night, Adjunct Xia drugged his wife's wine and gave up the spot that should have belonged to him on the bed with tears streaming down his face. Adjunct Xia's wife first lost her chastity to Lai Junchen. Later on, her husband found another reason to divorce her. In desperation, she could only become his concubine. Today, she had followed Lai Junchen back to the capital and walked past the Ding-Ding Gate. She knew that she would never be able to turn back for the rest of her life. She could not restrain her tears. Madame Wang saw that she was crying nonstop and was secretly worried. She quickly persuaded her in a low voice, "Don't cry. He is feeling happy. Once he sees it, you will have a lot of trouble." Madame Wang timidly looked towards the carriage in front of her and lowered her voice to speak to Miss Xiao. He usually looks no different from an ordinary person, but when he really goes crazy, he is like a demon. You must not make him angry." Xiao Nyangzi was using a handkerchief to wipe her tears. When she heard this, she could not help but look at Madame Wang in shock. Madame Wang said in a low voice, "In the past, I only felt that his actions were slightly different from ordinary people, but I could not tell that he was a little crazy. Ever since he was banished from the capital, he would occasionally reveal even more bizarre actions. If not for the fact that I was the person by his bedside, accompanying him year after year, only noticing it after a long period of time, I would not have been able to tell." As Madame Wang spoke, she suddenly shuddered. It was unknown what terrifying thing she had thought of. Xiao Nyangzi was even more afraid and did not even dare to cry any more. The moment Lai Junchen entered the Ding-Ding Gate, he could not suppress his joy. Fortunately, other than that wild shout when he first reached the main street of Dingding. He did not do anything too out of line. It was only when he returned to his own residence that the smile on his face disappeared and turned into a gloomy expression. At the entrance of his residence, only Wei Suizhong, who had just received the news, rushed over to welcome him. He stood alone under the setting sun. Wei Suizhong was the latest to be promoted to an imperial censor. Due to his lack of seniority, he was left behind to guard the censorate that day and did not get the opportunity to become an imperial envoy. As such, he managed to escape the calamity. The censorate was now emptied. When Lai Junqin left the capital, he still had many lackeys under him. Today, when he returned to the capital, only Wei Suizhong was left. Deputy Prime Minister. The moment Wei Suizhong saw Lai Junqin, he prostrated himself on the ground and burst into tears. "What are you crying for?" Lai Junqin kicked Wei Suizhong to the ground and strode into the mansion. He saw that the ground was covered with fallen leaves, and a few birds and crows flew up in a panic as he barged in. The mansion that had been left unattended had become a piece of ruin. Lai Junqin could not help but let out a strange cry and held to the sky. "This is what you all owe me! This is what you all owe me! I will definitely collect all of my debts with interest. Just you wait, ha 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 ha! I, Lai Junqin, am back to collect my debts." The strange cry that sounded like an owl crying and laughing scared even more crows and sparrows away. A wild cat scurried towards the entrance of the residence in a panic and just happened to scurry under Miss Xiao's skirt. Miss Xiao screamed and fell into Madame Wang's arms. Madame Wang grabbed her hand tightly and said in a low voice in fear, His madness is acting up again." The sun was setting, and it was already dusk in Ji Province's Xuanmiao Monastery. Since that day when Priest Zhang made a mistake and revealed the secrets of the heavens, who knew how many times Lu Silly had come to visit and begged and kowtowed. Priest Zhang was forced into a corner and was only willing to explain to him in detail. Candles were lit in the room in advance. Each candle was as small as a bean, and the light flickered. The doors and windows were closed, and even the servant was excluded from the door. The flickering candlelight shone on the faces of the two of them, giving off an indescribable sense of strangeness. "Provincial Governor Liu, you are fated to be the Grand Preceptor. However, this Grand Preceptor should not be in this dynasty." "Should not be in this dynasty?" "Old immortal means." Lu Silly's expression changed, and he cried out, "Is the Wu Zhou dynasty about to change?" Silence. Daoist Zhang quickly stopped him. He got up and looked around before returning to sit down. His sneaky actions made Lu Silly even more nervous. Daoist Zhang lowered his voice and said, "That's right. The world is about to change." Lu Silly muttered, "How can it be?" Daoist Zhang laughed coldly and said, "When Emperor Wen of Sui was still alive, how strong was Great Sui? The country was vast, the people were strong, the soldiers were strong, and there were many talents. Since the Qin and Han dynasties, how many times has there been such a golden age? What was the result? Emperor Wen of Sui died, and Yangguang took over the throne. In just a few years, there were 18 rebellions and 72 wars. The seemingly indestructible Great Sui Empire was destroyed, and Li Yuan, who drove the carriage for Yangguang, is now in the imperial court. Can the current Wu Zhou dynasty compare to the Great Sui dynasty of the past?" Lu Silly swallowed his saliva nervously and said with difficulty, "Old immortal, you mean once the Empress passes away, the world will be in chaos?" Daoist Zhang nodded his head heavily and said mysteriously, "Provincial governors should know more about the situation in the world than I do. The Empress is old and will pass away soon. Once she dies, the Wu and Li families will rise up and the world will be like the end of Sui dynasty. Heroes will fight for the throne and the flames of war will rise everywhere." The situation that Daoist Zhang described was really easy to happen. The Li Tang and the Wu Zhou clansmen were now fighting for the throne to the death. Once the Empress passed away, the Li Tang would have the hearts of the people, and the Wu Zhou would have the military power. The two sides would fight for it, and the world would be in chaos. Lu Sili's eyes froze, and his eyes seemed to have turned into two stones. After a while his eyes flickered, and he said excitedly, "I understand. Then, is it the Li family or the Wu family who will rule the world? Who should I lean towards and be loyal to? Old immortal, please enlighten me." Taoist Zhang chuckled and said, "Qin lost its throne, and the world chased after it. The one who will emerge victorious in the end will not be the Li family, nor will it be the Wu family." Lu Sili's expression tightened, and he hurriedly asked. Then Taoist Zhang's voice deepened, and he moved closer to him and said in a low voice, "The imperial energy is still in Luoyang, but it is not in the Li family or the Wu family." Lu Sili's voice trembled, and he said, Then who has it?" Taoist Zhang stroked his goatee and said in a low voice, "This person is the military advisor of Luoyang Prefecture. His surname is Qi, and his name is Qi Lianhui. Provincial Governor Lu, you should plan early so that you can have the merit of founding the country, assist the emperor, and control the officials." Even though Lu Sili had long believed in Taoist Zhang's words, plotting a rebellion was not a small matter. Lu Sili did not dare to make a sudden decision. He slowly sat down and started to think deeply. Sunset in the forest. Sunset in the forest. The sunset and the autumn forest blended into one color. It was impossible to tell whether the sunset was bathing in the dyed forest or the dyed autumn forest was bathing in the sunset. It was a very warm color. Being in it, it was like being in a fairyland. Maple trees were mixed in the forest of golden leaves. Red clouds lingered and red maple trees bloomed. The carriage had already stopped. Princess Taiping sat at the front of the carriage and gazed at the fairyland scenery in front of her. She was slightly lost in thought. Yang Fan walked out of the carriage and sat next to her. Princess Taiping was still in the long attire she wore when she participated in the grand ceremony. She wore a 9D crown on her head and 2 golden phoenixes holding pearls in their mouths. 2 pearls, emerald peonies, and warm flowers appeared on her left and right side. She wore a large robe and a red cape with a jade leather belt around her waist. The ribbon was tied with a jade pendant. It was very grand, but the grace and demure expression on her face was incompatible with the solemn and gorgeous attire. At this moment, it was as if her whole person had blended into the sunset and the forest. Yang Fan calmly looked at her for a long time. He was also infected by her mood. He turned his head and began to appreciate the beautiful scenery of the mountains and fields. The two of them did not say anything. They just felt the sunlight, the setting sun, the maple leaves that were in full swing, and the refreshing and pleasant breeze that brushed their faces. Forgetting everything, after a long time, Princess Taiping took a deep breath. She turned her head and smiled sweetly at Yang Fan. Last time, on the boat of the Luo River, there was someone else. But here there is only you and me. Today you belong to me alone. Taiping's eyes sparkled, faintly carrying a sense of plunder and capture. For a beauty to have such an aggressive gaze when looking at a man, in all these years, Yang Fan had only seen it in her eyes. The female beast revealed her sharp teeth and claws, preparing to enjoy the meal on her plate. But an amused smile appeared in Yang Fan's eyes. To be her prey, who would not be willing. The Yang Fan who had once struggled and escaped, in the end, could not escape his fate. Chapter 648. The mouth was the most attractive part of a woman's body. With a slight tilt, a slight pursing, a pout, a bite, or an opening and closing of the mouth, there would be a different kind of amorous feelings quietly emerging. At this moment, Princess Taiping's plump and sexy lips were gently licked by a touch of fresh red. That was the tip of her flexible tongue. She was about to capture her prey. Like a man-eating flower, she did not rely on agility and speed, nor did she use her fangs and claws. Instead, she relied on her beautiful seduction. 2 pairs of lips gradually kissed each other. They kissed goodbye to the sunset between their lips. Their lips were so tight that nothing else could be tolerated, not even the all-pervasive light. Then, a pair of figures gradually fell under the setting sun. The setting sun, the distant mountains, the treetops, the sunset glow, the withered grass, the magnificent carriage, a man, a woman, and a black horse with a glossy coat. All of these interweaved into a three-dimensional, beautiful picture. A gentle wind brushed past this picture. The horse gnawed the hay on the ground. After eating the grass near its mouth, it would wander a few steps forward. Thus, the carriage would stop and walk aimlessly in the forest. Wherever the grass was lush, the carriage would go there, but the owner of the carriage did not care about it. The 9 sea beasts' crown was too much of a hindrance. Without waiting for Yang Fan to take it off, Li Lingyue took it off first, letting her fine black hair fall like a waterfall. The 9 sea beasts' crown, which had been casually thrown aside, knocked against the board of the carriage. The golden phoenix was bent and the pearl was covered with dust, but no one cared to look at it. Leather belt, big belt, red cape, large gown, even a bow dress, plain gauze, knee cover, ribbon tie, hanging. The 3 layers of clothing finally made Yang Fan confused. The pretty man could not be considered an expert in undressing people. The undergarments, overcoats, undergarments, and all kinds of leather belts and ribbons were successfully entangled in his hands, wrapping Princess Taiping into a dumpling. This dumpling was like being torn by a naughty child who did not know how to eat it. Half of the clothes revealed a little bit of red here and a trace of white there. Although it could be seen, it could not be eaten. With her eyes closed shyly, Princess Taiping opened her eyes and was shocked by her own appearance. She couldn't help but giggle. Looking at her Longjuan's annoyed look, the considerate princess suddenly straightened her back like a fish on a hook. She jumped up and threw herself at her Langjun. Then they tangled together again, their mouths and tongues intertwined. Princess Taiping's skillful hands had already unfolded her Longjuan's clothes without her noticing. This time it was Yang Fan's turn to fall down. Princess Taiping, who was wrapped like a rice dumpling, sat by his side. She glanced at him with her watery eyes and then bent down with a sweet smile on her face. As soon as the warm and moist feeling touched his body, Yang Fan's body trembled violently and his soul left his body. Princess Taiping really loved this little Langjun to death. She wished she could swallow him and a mouthful of water into her stomach. Thereupon she swallowed mouthful by mouthful with great effort. Unfortunately, her Langjun could not swallow it no matter what. As a result, one was stuttering and the other was hovering between life and death. The sunset also seemed to feel shy. It was so shy that its face became redder and redder. Finally, it covered its face and hid itself under the distant mountains and behind the woods. Only a ray of light peeked out from between its fingers, staring at the passionate scene that it wanted to see, but did not dare to see. The world suddenly darkened for a moment. What replaced it was the flirtatious expression of Princess Taiping's lips and teeth. At some point, a violent ripping sound rang out, causing the horse to raise its head in surprise. As far as the eye could see, there was only silence in the forest, and there was nothing. The horse lowered its head in relief and continued to nibble on its grass. After a moment, there was an exclamation from inside the carriage. "Oh my God! And you are wrapped in so many layers of white cloth." Then there was a burst of enchanting laughter. "Langjun, you are so strong. Keep tearing." The man's extremely angry voice sounded very ungentlemanly. "How can you tear it? Get up and take it off." The horse did not understand. Anyway, if it was not "giddy up," then it had nothing to do with it. It just continued to eat grass. However, after a moment, the carriage began to shake and shake as if it was driving on a gravel road in the mountains. The shaft was loosened and tightened, which made it very uncomfortable to lower its head to eat grass. Much, much later, when the handsome black horse was led into the stable, he snorted so loudly and vexedly that a pretty mare in the stable, who was trying to be affectionate with him, turned her head away in fright. The black horse was very unhappy. It did not have a smooth eating process that night. The road in the woods was really too bumpy. A thin man rode a yellow buckskin horse and rushed to Luoyang City in the dark of night. No one could see that he was originally a woman, and a very beautiful woman at that. Even her disciple, Tian Ai knew, who she had never spent much effort in teaching, could disguise herself as a Ku Xen monk without anyone noticing, let alone her Shifu. Gu Zhuting disguised herself as a man to make it easier for her to travel. Even though her body wasn't completely healed, with her martial arts, she wasn't afraid of robbers. However, disguising herself as a man would save her a lot of trouble. She was anxious to get to Luoyang, and now that she had finally stepped into Luoyang, she let out a long sigh. Her whole body relaxed, and she felt a kind of exhaustion. She traveled day and night all the way to Luoyang. When she arrived, she thought she would sleep at the city gate and wait until dawn to enter the city. However, when she arrived at the city, she found that the city gate was open and the long street was brightly lit. There was an endless stream of pedestrians. It was as lively as the Lantern Festival, which surprised her very much. Gu Zhuting led the horse into the city and asked an old woman who was playing with her grandson on the street. Only then did she know that the emperor was holding the inauguration ceremony of Tianshu today, so the curfew was lifted to celebrate with the people. She had also heard of Tianshu. It was said that this was a giant pillar that had never existed since the beginning of time. However, when she looked into the distance along Dingding Street, she couldn't see that Tianshu. That 100-foot-tall Tianshu had been completely hidden in the darkness of the night. Only the top of Tianshu shone brightly, as if there was a flame hanging in the air. It was a giant cloud disk with a diameter of 3 feet. On top of the cloud disk, there was a bead of fire that was 1 foot tall and 10 feet wide. The shell of the bead of fire was polished to an extremely bright degree. During the day, it shone like the sun and the moon. At night, its light was much dimmer. However, the top of this bead of fire had an opening. The hollow bead of fire was filled with lamp oil. At this moment, the bead of fire had been ignited. The fire raged as if the bead of fire was hanging in the air, spitting out angry flames. Hidden in the heaven behind it was the giant and majestic Buddha. At this moment, the 99,999 oil lamps in the Ming Hall were all lit. The giant Buddha that shone with golden light was clearly visible. From the Dingding Gate along the 4 miles of long street, one's line of sight extended all the way to the top of Tianshu. The burning bead of fire at the top of Tianshu was right between the eyebrows of the Buddha statue. This added a bit of mystery to the Buddha statue. Gu Zhuting led the horse and slowly walked forward step by step. She was very hesitant. If she had returned to the capital to report normally, then she would have gone to see her immediate superior first. Under normal circumstances, she didn't need to let the sovereign know that she had come to report. She only needed to report to the chief. When the sovereign had any orders, the chief would naturally assign and make arrangements. But this time, she had rushed to the capital before she had fully recovered. It was to report to the sovereign that he had a biological daughter who was currently in the hands of young Master Jiang. She did not dare to delay along the way. Now that she had reached the capital, of course she should immediately see the sovereign and report the news to him. However, it was currently the middle of the night, and most of the people on the streets would not know where the residence of a heavenly official doctor was. By the time she spent all her effort to find out where the sovereign's residence was and rushed over, it would probably be daybreak. Even if she successfully found the sovereign's residence in the middle of the night, the sovereign wouldn't be able to take any action immediately. Gu Zhuting convinced herself like this, but she was actually a little apprehensive. She didn't understand the sovereign's temperament at all, and this news was definitely not good news to the sovereign. When things came to a head, it was inevitable that she would be a little afraid to see Yang Fan. Even if she could delay for a moment, she would unconsciously find an excuse for herself. I'd better go see the chief first. It's a good opportunity to understand this sovereign. I'll go see him tomorrow. Thinking of this, Gu Zhuting leapt onto the horse and slowly galloped away. With a change of thought, she did a very appropriate thing. The child was the flesh that fell from the mother's body, and the mother and son were connected. Although the man also loved the child, once he heard about this, he would never be as devastated as a woman. Yang Fan was coincidentally not at the residence tonight. If she went to visit at this time and Xiao Man knew that she had a biological daughter that fell into young Master Zhang's hands, she would probably be deeply worried and wash her face with tears every day. She would never be able to be happy again. Before the child could be rescued, Xiao Man would be tortured until she was thin and weak. And this was still the best situation. Gu Zhuting's change of thought undoubtedly dragged Xiao Man, who was almost pushed into the abyss of hell, back. When Luoyang City's 800th bell rang one after another, Yang Fan was already neatly dressed and riding a horse. He appeared at the top of Luoyang City Wall in high spirits. He had always been confused. When a man and a woman made love, it was clearly the man who tossed and turned and plowed without end. Why did the woman always appear more tired than the man? When he got up, his beloved Princess Highness still maintained the limp appearance from last night. Her cheeks were flushed, and she was in a deep sleep. Riding past Anil Square, in front of him was Showin Square. Yang Fan, subconsciously, looked towards the first square he lived in after coming to Luoyang. Perhaps if he raised his head, he would see a familiar person. He really did see a familiar person, but this familiar person did not come out of Showin Square. Instead, he came from Jianqun Street between Showin Square and Anil Square. He rode a white horse, his face was like jade, his eyes were like bright stars, and there were 3 wisps of beard under his chin. He truly had a good appearance. Lai Junchen also saw him. He immediately reined in the reins, and the 2 enemies stood at the crossroads. Chapter 649. Lai Junchen gazed at Yang Fan for a moment, then suddenly smiled happily. Putting aside Lai Junchen's knowledge and character, just from his appearance alone, Lai Junchen was as handsome as jade. He was indeed a rarely seen handsome man, but when he smiled, there was an evil aura emanating from his bones that made one's heart go cold. Seeing his strange smile, Yang Fan felt very uncomfortable. He was not afraid of Lai Junchen. In terms of martial strength, he could crush Lai Junchen with 1 finger. At most, Lai Junchen's martial strength was at the level of a ruffian fighting in the streets. In terms of power, he was now the highly sought-after heavenly official merit examination officer, while Lai Junchan was only a county officer. The difference between them could not be measured. But the smile that Lai Junchen suddenly revealed was overflowing with evil. It was not the expression of a normal person at all. Yang Fan could not help but feel a chill in his heart. The corner of Lai Junchen's mouth curled higher and higher. Finally, it turned into a loud laugh. Kicking off the horse's hooves, he came to greet Yang Fan. Cupping his hands, he said, "Yang Longzhong, pleased to hear that officer has been promoted to the heavenly official residence. Congratulations, ha ha ha." Yang Fan might not know about the transfer of an ordinary official, but how could Yang Fan not know about the transfer of Lai Junchen, who had stirred up countless carnage in Luoyang and killed countless prime ministers? This matter was already known to everyone in the Ministry of Appointments. So seeing him appear, Yang Fan was not surprised. He smiled faintly, his hand still holding onto the reins of the horse. Casually he replied, "County Officer Lai has finally been transferred back to the capital. The bitterness is over and the sweetness is coming. Making a comeback is something worth celebrating." Lai Junchen waved his hands and put on an extremely frightened expression. "You flatter me. I am only a lowly county officer now. How can this be considered a comeback? It is just that the sage took pity on me for my hard work and transferred me to the foot of the emperor so that I can live a more stable and comfortable life." Ha 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 ha! When Lai Junchen was speaking just now, no matter if he was pretending to be respectful or afraid, his facial expressions were unusually rich. No matter what expression he put on, His eyes were smiling, and the corners of his mouth were curled up. Together with his conflicting expressions, it seemed inexplicably strange. At this moment, he finally couldn't help but laugh out loud. When Yang Fan heard his laughter, he couldn't help but frown. He could tell that Lai Junchen wasn't trying to show off, nor was he trying to show off. He was truly happy, but Yang Fan really didn't know why Lai Junchen was suddenly so happy while they were talking. Lai Junchen was grinning from ear to ear as he said, "This lowly official has just arrived in the capital today. I must first report to the Luoyang government and see the superior official before I can take up my post. Yang Langzhong, let's meet again when we have time. I'll take my leave now." Yang Fan nodded, but his brows were still slightly furrowed as he watched Lai Junchen turn his horse and leave. Lai Junchen hadn't taken a few steps on his horse when he suddenly burst into laughter again. The laughter came abruptly and disappeared just as quickly. There was a pause in the middle before another burst of sudden laughter. Yang Fan couldn't help but shake his head and mumble to himself, "Why is Lai Junchen acting so crazy?" As Lai Junchen walked, he couldn't help but want to laugh. He also knew that it was strange for a person to suddenly laugh while riding a horse, but he couldn't help it. When he saw Yang Fan, an inexplicable joy filled his entire body. Yang Fan was the main culprit behind his demotion to the same province. He was his great enemy. His great enemy was still alive and well, waiting for him to personally wear him down. When he thought of the day when he would bring down Yang Fan and make him his prisoner, he couldn't help but want to laugh at the scene of him personally torturing him with all sorts of torture tools. When he thought of Yang Fan's charming wife that he coveted, Lai Junchen was even more elated. He didn't feel that there was anything abnormal about him. On the contrary, he felt that his mind was abnormally clear and his reactions were incomparably nimble. However, his control over his emotions seemed to be somewhat lacking. Who cared? Now that he had finally returned to Luoyang, the day he made a comeback was just around the corner. Lai Junchen walked and laughed all the way until he reached the Luoyang government office. He dismounted in front of the screen wall and knew that he couldn't laugh for no reason. He held back for a moment and suppressed the inexplicable joy in his heart. Only then did he tidy his clothes and change into a solemn appearance before walking into the office. He thought about his power and prestige after making a comeback, but he never thought about how he could make a comeback now that he was just a Hugong County magistrate. He thought about punishing Yang Fan, but he never thought about how Yang Fan's current position was much higher than his. How he could bring down Yang Fan. He thought about the joy of humiliating Yang Fan in every way possible after bringing down Yang Fan. Lai Junchen's mental state had always been a bit problematic, but on the outside he only appeared to be a bit crueler, more paranoid, and more perverted than ordinary people. No one had noticed that he was mentally abnormal, from a ruffian in Chang, and to a deputy minister of the imperial censor, then from a deputy minister of the imperial censor to a Tongzhou military adjunct. These kinds of ups and downs had further stimulated his mental state. However, he didn't feel that there was anything strange about himself. Other than his wife, Madame Wang, no one else had noticed anything abnormal about him. Yang Fan watched Lai Junchen walk away happily, and his brows furrowed even tighter. When he had been framed and imprisoned by Lai Junchen had once threatened Xiaoman, wanting her to dedicate herself to him in exchange for a chance of survival for her husband. He knew that Lai Junchen had designs on Xiaoman, so Lai Junchen's abnormal behavior today made him feel a bit uneasy. Yang Fan thought for a moment and gave up the idea of directly returning to the yamen. He turned his horse and rushed to his mansion. It could be said that he was confused because of his concern. Yang Fan had already entered the fortune house and suddenly remembered that his home was not what it used to be. Even if Xiaoman wanted to go to Nan City to see his family's property, he had a new to accompany him in the open, and there were masters in the succession hall to protect him in the dark, so he didn't have to worry about being plotted against. Yang Fan smiled, thinking that he had already arrived at his home, so it was good to go back and have a look. However, he didn't need to tell Xiaoman to be extra careful when she went out. When Yang Fan arrived at his mansion, he had just pulled the reins when a servant beside him exclaimed in surprise. When he went to Golden Grain Garden, he had brought 3 guards with him. These guards were usually quiet and didn't like to talk. Moreover, they had calm temperaments and didn't have times when they were startled. Therefore, when they heard the guard's exclamation, Yang Fan couldn't help but glance at him. The guard hurriedly said, "Lang Zhong, the girl in front, is one of us." These guards around Yang Fan didn't call Yang Fan sovereign, except in very private occasions, but called him by his official position. They completely regarded themselves as the guards of the heavenly official Lang Zhong, not the people of the succession hall. But this way, it was not convenient for him to explain the identity of the person he saw, so he paused. Yang Fan followed his gaze and saw a pretty girl in green, walking towards his mansion step by step. Gu Zhuting had washed off the disguise and changed into ordinary women's clothing. In order not to attract attention, she didn't even ride a horse. She directly walked to the fortune house according to the way she inquired from the leader. At this time, she had just arrived at the Yang mansion. There were 4 knights standing in front of the Yang mansion. This scene was very conspicuous. Gu Zhuting had already seen them. As soon as she saw the 3 obviously dressed as guards, they were all people of the succession hall that she was familiar with. Gu Zhuting immediately guessed the identity of the person they were guarding in the middle. This person must be their new sovereign. So young, so handsome. This was the first feeling Gu Zhuting had when she saw Yang Fan. The previous sovereign of the obvious sect, young Master Jiang, was not handsome, but his presence and demeanor always gave people the feeling that he was as tall as a pine tree and as pure as ice. The sovereign of the hidden sect, Xin Mu, did not have a stunning appearance and even seemed slightly average. Only those who had interacted with him would feel the unique charm that came from the inside out. Compared to these 2 people, Yang Fan had an advantage in appearance. Gu Zhuting only glanced at Yang Fan and did not dare to raise her eyes to examine him again. She quickened her steps to greet them. At this time, the guard had already whispered a few words into Yang Fan's ear, explaining Gu Zhuting's identity. Yang Fan knew that she definitely had a matter. This was the entrance, and it was not easy to speak with so many people coming and going. He immediately got off his horse and walked into the mansion. The 3 guards also got off their horses, and one of them went to greet Gu Zhuting. Last night, the entire city was celebrating, and the gatekeeper, Mo Xuanfei, enjoyed the excitement and sneaked out to have fun for half a night. Since the master of the house wasn't in the residence, there was no need to wake up early today. Mo Xuanfei returned to the residence early in the morning and was catching up on his sleep in the gatekeeper's room. Suddenly, he heard someone knocking on the door. He quickly put on his shoes and ran out to greet the door with his disheveled clothes. When the door opened, Mo Xuanfei was shocked and quickly straightened his body. He called out, "Ah Lang." Yang Fan ignored his disheveled clothes and waved his hand. "Bring that woman to the study room to see me." He then turned around and walked out. In the study room, Gu Zhuting greeted Yang Fan politely and told him everything that she wanted to report. Yang Fan was completely stunned. He thought that this woman brought important news from Li Taigong or some other senior of the aristocratic clan to tell him. He never expected that it would be such an unimaginable matter. Not only did he have a son, but he also had a daughter. Yang Fan sat there and didn't know what kind of feeling he had in his heart. Once upon a time he was still alone and had no blood relatives in this world. But overnight he had a son and a daughter. Then, thinking that his daughter had fallen into the hands of young Master Jiang, Yang Fan suddenly felt a kind of heartache. Gu Zhuting stole a glance at Yang Fan's expression. Sometimes he was happy, sometimes he was worried, sometimes he was angry, sometimes he was sad, but he didn't have any intention to question her. Only then did she feel relieved. Just now, when Yang Fan learned that she was the one who delivered Xiaoman, he had solemnly thanked her. As for his daughter falling into the hands of young Master Jiang, She wasn't the one who kidnapped Xiao Man, nor was she the one who helped young Master Jiang take away the child. Instead, because of this, Xiao Man almost lost his life. She still had to worry that Yang Fan would vent his anger on her due to his mood swings. Gu Zhuting stammered, I really don't understand. Why did young Master Jiang hide the sovereign's daughter? I know why. Yang Fan interrupted her words and slightly closed his eyes. He had already remembered what Anu had told him about the scene that happened at the peak of Mount Hua. He remembered that young Master Jiang forced her to jump off the cliff. Connecting the two events, the real purpose of young Master Jiang's strange behavior was clear. But knowing young Master Jiang's purpose didn't mean that he could save his daughter. Yang Fan's heart was in a mess. He didn't notice that Gu Zhuting's eyes suddenly turned cold. Her wrist trembled and a flying knife slipped into her palm. Chapter 650. Young Master Jiang is doing this because I have taken his woman. After Yang Fan finished, he was silent for a moment. He sneered and said, It's just that he thinks that it should be his woman. Gu Zhuting was somewhat at a loss. She knew about young Master Jiang's strange obsession with cleanliness. How could young Master Jiang have a woman? The scene that happened at the peak of Mount Hua was a kind of embarrassment and humiliation to young Master Jiang. So other than young Master Jiang's absolute confidants, no one else knew what happened there. Gu Zhuting only knew that Miss Anu had died unexpectedly in the western region. She did not know that young Master Jiang had revealed his feelings for Anu at the peak of Mount Hua. Yang Fan took a deep breath and said in a low voice, Because of this, he will not abuse my daughter. I must save the child. But remember, this matter must not be known by others, especially my wife. Also, you cannot show yourself from now on. Young Master Jiang thinks that you are dead. This secret of his will never be known by others. If you let him. When Yang Fan suddenly heard that he had a daughter, and that his daughter had fallen into young Master Jiang's hands, he was indeed confused. But although his heart was confused, he did not panic. His mind was still very clear. He immediately thought that he must not let Xiao Man know about this matter. At the same time, Gu Zhuting could not show herself in public again. Now that Gu Zhuting continued to maintain her dead state, it would not arouse young Master Jiang's vigilance, and he would not carry out special care for his daughter. It would be easier for him to save his daughter. After nervously analyzing everything, Yang Fan immediately ordered Gu Zhuting. As soon as he raised his head, he saw Gu Zhuting's bright black eyes, carrying a dangerous glint. Her figure was originally plump and soft, graceful like a willow, but right now it was slightly taut, as if she was about to pounce. Her posture was filled with strength and movement, as if she was a dangerous cheetah that was about to pounce on the treetops. When Yang Fan saw the hurried look that Gu Zhuting gave him, he immediately understood. His tone only paused for a moment, then very naturally continued. If I let him be on guard, he will definitely increase his vigilance. It will not be easy for me to save the child. Before he could finish the word, Yang Fan suddenly gestured to Gu Zhuting, and the two of them rushed out at the same time. Gu Zhuting kicked out an iron pear with embroidered stool, smashing the window with a bang sound. Immediately afterwards, her body was like a real leopard, using an extremely graceful, agile, and ferocious posture to pounce out. Yang Fan turned around and ran to the door. When he reached the door, he took down the scabbard on the wall. He was busy thinking of a countermeasure just now, so he didn't notice the movement outside, but Gu Zhuting heard it. This was the Yang mansion, so if there were servants and maids walking around outside, it would be normal. However, the sound that Gu Zhuting heard was clearly someone quietly approaching. From the light footsteps that were almost inaudible, it could be determined that this person was intentionally eavesdropping, deliberately hiding their tracks. Therefore, when Yang Fan raised his head, Gu Zhuting gave him a look and then pouted her lips towards the outside of the wall. Yang Fan immediately understood her intention and continued to speak to confuse the eavesdropper outside the window, while at the same time looking for an opportunity to rush out with her. Today's Yang mansion, although not said to be a dragon's pool or a tiger's den, it was not far from it. The person who came could actually hide from the many guards, both in the open and in the dark, all the way to the study room. Then this person's martial arts might not be inferior to Lu Boyan's. How could Yang Fan dare to be careless? He kicked open the door, and the sword in his hand stabbed out like a bolt of lightning. Lightning suddenly appeared in Yang Fan's hand, and then immediately condensed into a frozen stream of ice. He held the sharp sword in his hand, and stood there motionless. Gu Zhuting followed, closely behind the embroidered stool, and rushed out. The moment her figure passed through the window, she spun in midair in a strange manner, and the flying knife in her hand was like the sharp teeth of a cheetah, flashing with a cold light. At the same time, her left hand gripped her belt tightly, as if she was going to pull out some kind of weapon. However, her movements suddenly froze when she saw the person outside, so that even with her agile movements, when she landed, there was a thud sound. Ah, nu! Gu Zhuting cried out in shock. The person in front of her was obviously her disciple, Tin Ano, who is said to have died in the western regions. Tin Ano was stunned by the shock coming from the window and the door, until he heard Gu Zhuting's exclamation. Then he answered embarrassedly, "Master Gu!" The movement in the study room immediately alerted the guards of Yang Fan's mansion. Suddenly, a few people appeared on top of the wall and at the door of the courtyard. There was an old servant in green holding a broom, a young servant in green holding a basin, and a wet nurse with a blissful face and a sturdy waist. The masters of the succession hall looked like dragons and tigers. If they did not appear at this moment, who would know that they were Wuling masters with unique skills? Yang Fan turned his wrist, and the sword returned to its sheath. "It's fine, you can all leave." Yang Fan ordered the old servant who swept the floor, the young servant who washed the clothes, and the wet nurse. He turned around and walked into the study room, saying at the same time, "Ah, nu, follow me." Gu Zhuting saw Tin Ano, who came back from the dead. At first she was very shocked, but then she remembered that she was young Master Zhang's trusted aide, and this time she came to harm the Lord, so she immediately waved the flying knife again. But at this time, Yang Fan's words passed into her ears. Gu Zhuting waved the flying knife in the air, and her left hand clasped the belt, and she was stunned again. Tin Ano looked at Gu Zhuting, turned around, and obediently followed Yang Fan into the study room. Gu Zhuting calmed down, and then followed behind, thinking anxiously in her heart, "What is going on? Could it be? Anu was ordered by young master to fake her death and sneak to the Lord as a spy? Very likely." Thinking of this, Gu Zhuting clenched the weapon again, waiting to expose the true identity of Tin Ano to the Lord. Yang Fan returned to the study room, turned around to look at Tin Ano, and then looked at Gu Zhuting, who had a vigilant face, and smiled. "Miss Gu, don't worry, the woman I mentioned just now is her. Anu is definitely not young Master Zhang's spy." Anu, who was always by young Master Zhang's side, actually became the woman of the Lord? So the Lord not only stole young Master Zhang's throne, but also Yang Fan obviously knew Anu's previous identity, and his words couldn't be disbelieved. Gu Zhuting knew there must be many exciting stories, but now was obviously not the time to satisfy her heart of gossip. She flicked her finger, and the flying knife disappeared again and stood to the side. Yang Fan slightly frowned and asked Tin Ano, "If you want to come over, just come over. Why are you sneaking around?" Tin Ano looked awkward and didn't speak. Her reason for eavesdropping was really not to be known to outsiders. Last night, Yang Fan didn't return to the residence, and came back early this morning, but brought a very charming woman to the study room. When Tin Ano heard this news, his heart immediately felt somewhat anxious. Xiao Man and Yang Fan were fated since childhood. She not only saw Yang Fan as her husband, but also saw Yang Fan as her brother. Both of them had a very deep affection in their love, so Xiao Man wouldn't be jealous, and never worried that Yang Fan would fall in love with someone else. But Anu, who was wholeheartedly looking forward to the wedding next spring, didn't have the capital like her, so how could she not be worried? "So, She wanted to see what kind of coquettish vixen would seduce Yang Fan to not return home at night, and even bring her home early in the morning. But in the end, she just happened to hear such shocking news, seeing Teneno's somewhat embarrassed expression. Yang Fan's eyes flickered slightly. He roughly understood Anu's intention, and could only smile bitterly and asked again, "Did you hear what we said just now?" Teneno bit her lower lip and nodded lightly. Yang Fan sighed, and then said to Gu Zhuting, "Just now Anu called you Master Gu. You and Anu are—" Gu Zhuting hurriedly explained the relationship between her, and Anu. Yang Fan suddenly nodded. "Miss Gu, you can't expose your identity now. Just stay in my residence. During this period of time, you can live with Anu, your appearance. Anu is proficient in the art of disguise." Teneno timidly said, "What Master Gu taught me is the art of invisibility and disguise." Yang Fan made no sound, and said, "Then it's done, Miss Gu. It's best for you to change your appearance. Although my residence is very safe, but just in case," Gu Zhuting hurriedly nodded. "This subordinate understands, sect head. Please rest assured. This subordinate will change her appearance in a while." Yang Fan nodded, and after a moment of silence said, "I'm going to the yamen now. Anu, call someone over to repair the study room." Teneno hesitated for a moment, and then plucked up her courage to ask, "Erling, about the matter of rescuing the child." Yang Fan had already walked past her, and then he stopped, slowly turned around, and gently patted her shoulder and said softly, "You don't have to worry. The child is in his hands now. There won't be any danger. I also want to rescue the child immediately. But if we act rashly now, we will only alert the enemy, and it will definitely do more harm than good. We don't know where he is, and if we make a big fuss, it will definitely alert him. He still doesn't know that the secret has been leaked, so he won't be too strict with the child. If we make a big fuss, it will be difficult to rescue the child. Don't worry, I will soon lure the snake out of the hole, and let him jump out on his own." Yang Fan nodded to Anu firmly and finally said, "Don't let Xiaoman know." After saying that, he strode away. Anu faintly looked at Yang Fan's receding figure, and for a moment her heart was filled with guilt and self-blame. Originally, since Xiaoman and the child were rescued, her worries were gone, and she was already very happy, but this news was like a heavy stone, pressing heavily on her heart. Seeing that Yang Fan had already gone far, Gu Zhuting couldn't suppress the curiosity in her heart, and asked, "Anu, why are you with Sect Master?" Anu shook her head, and didn't answer question. "I can't wait here with a clear conscience, Master Gu. I should rescue the child with my own hands." Yang Fan walked out of the mansion, leaped onto his war horse and galloped away. He rarely galloped on the long streets of Luoyang, but this time he galloped on his horse. Fortunately, there weren't many people on the widest Ding-Ding Street in the morning. Yang Fan galloped all the way to the Tianjin Bridge, and then suddenly pulled on the reins. The war horse neighed and stood up. Yang Fan looked back, and couldn't help but look up to the sky and let out a turbid breath. The 100 squares of Luoyang were as orderly as a chessboard. The affairs of the world were like chess pieces, and life was like a game of chess. He, who was immediately at the Tianjin Bridge, was the pawn crossing the river. He could only take it one step at a time. He was clear about his goal, but before he reached his destination, he would never know how many chariots, horses, cannons, and elephant soldiers would be laying layers upon layers of killing traps for him along the way. He advanced without retreating, not to abandon his wife and child, but to reunite. Chapter 651. Yang Fan returned to the Heavenly Magistrate's office. Suppressing his worries and the pain of losing his young daughter, he concentrated on sorting out the preliminary list of officials. He had the right to screen, but not the final decision. Therefore, the number of people on the list was 3 times the number of southern border officials needed. Only by reporting it to the Political Affairs Hall could the prime ministers have room to choose. But in the list of officials for every position, Wu Sansi and Li Zhaoda's people were the absolute majority. After lunch, Yang Fan carefully checked again, and the final list was finally out. Yang Fan called Li Lingshi, Li Zhenghu, who was pretending to be diligent. hurriedly came forward. Yang Fan handed Li Jinghu the name list, which was dotted with dots and ink, to Li Jinghu and said, "This is the list of officials that I have preliminarily selected. Make a copy of it. After I check it, you must hand it to the Political Affairs Hall before the Yamen is dismissed today." Yes. Li Jinghu quickly took the list with both hands. Yang Fan solemnly said, "I will go out for a while. Make a copy of it carefully. Remember, this is a serious matter. Do not spread it out." Li Jinghu said with a terrified face, "I dare not. Doctor, please rest assured." In the past dynasties, the lightest punishment for officials who leaked government decrees and other confidential information was demoted and exiled. However, the leaking of government decrees and policies had never stopped. It was just that no one spread the news publicly without compensation. Instead, they had their own specialties and secretly leaked the news to the nobles they were attached to. Yang Fan left the Heavenly Magistrate's office and went to the Ministry of Justice. The 6 ministries were all on the same street to facilitate the official exchanges between the ministries. Riding on the horse, Yang Fan asked his subordinates, "Have our people been completely separated from Tao Sifong and the old nun of Hanoi?" One of them answered, "Ever since we received the headmaster's order, our people have retreated at full speed regardless of the losses. Relying on the protection of those 3 people can provide us with many conveniences. Therefore, there are many people who are willing to take over. Our losses have mostly been compensated by these people." Yang Fan smiled and said, "These losses are nothing. What's important is that our people have been stripped clean. I originally wanted to delay it for a few more days, but unfortunately the situation has changed, and I have no choice but to act in advance. Our people have already left, and that's for the best." Yang Fan turned around and said to another guard, "Go to the Golden Grain Garden's Purple Lake Garden and tell Her Royal Highness that everything is ready and we can start as promised." "Yes." The guard galloped his horse in the opposite direction. The guard who had just spoken to Yang Fan was obviously the leader of the guards, so he knew more inside information and was qualified to speak to Yang Fan. He lowered his voice and said, "Sect Master, our people don't need to move." Yang Fan gently shook his head and said, "There is no one that young Master Jiang doesn't know about our people. As long as we make a move, he will notice my intentions. Therefore, this time, we cannot move a single one of them. Don't worry, I have my own arrangements for this." "Yes, sir." Li Zhenghu first quickly copied a list of names, and with it in his sleeves, he went to the side room of the recording room. Seeing that there was no one else besides the servant in charge of grinding ink and serving water, he immediately passed the list to him and hurriedly ordered, "Go! Send it to the Wei Wang residence immediately." This servant was the son of one of his family servants, and he used his connections to get him to work as a servant in the Yamen. He more or less received a salary to supplement his family's income, and thus became his most trusted errand boy. The manservant took the list and quickly put it away, then rushed out. Li Zhenghu heaved a sigh of relief, then returned to the recording room and began to copy the second copy. This time he was meticulous, and his brush was extremely serious. Zhao Gan was the imperial official's Sifing officer. Sifing officer was mainly in charge of conferring titles of nobility. Titles of nobility were not easily conferred. It was either the death of the father, and the natural succession was only a normal procedure to go through at the imperial official's residence, or it was for military merits or for many years of loyalty to the country. An emperor rewarded them with a title of nobility, and there was no room for Sifing officer to maneuver, and there was no profit to be made. Therefore, although Zhao Gan had served in the imperial official's residence for many years, he had always been an insignificant official. Compared to the hot and powerful examiners, when it came to New Year's Day, generous gifts would be piled up like a mountain. It could be said that he was extremely poor. However, Zhao Gan was a man of great forbearance. He had been doing his job dutifully, Unlike his predecessors who used their connections in the Ministry of Personnel to transfer people to other government offices, or to prepare a generous gift and ask the assistant minister for help to transfer them to the local government offices. Otherwise, he would prepare a generous gift and ask the assistant minister for help to transfer them to a position with real power. As a result, because he had not been transferred for many years, he became the most senior official in the imperial official's residence. Because of his outstanding reputation, he had never had any serious conflicts with his colleagues, so his popularity and reputation were well known. Now, this Dr. Zhao, who had always been respected in the heavenly official's office, was sitting upright in his usually quiet room, where there was rarely a document to be sent in at the end of the day. He pinched his fingers and listened to the crack, crack, crack sounds made by his joints. His nervous mood gradually eased, but on his cheeks that were as sharp as a knife, a touch of excitement did not fade. He was born of the Han family, and when Wu Zetian vigorously promoted the Han officials to fight against the aristocrats of Shandong, he entered the imperial official's residence with the title of Mingjing. However, the ratio of entering the imperial official's residence was generally 10-1, while the ratio of entering the imperial official's residence was generally 100-1. There was a huge difference between the two, so the imperial official's residence was not very valued. Therefore, when he entered the imperial official's residence, his starting position was one level lower than his colleagues. In addition, he had always been an official, and it was difficult for him to show any outstanding performance. Therefore, when he was in his early 40s, there was no possibility for him to go further, and he stopped at the position of Lantian County Registrar. If there were no accidents, he would probably be squatting there like Zhang Jianji. If he did not live as long as Zhang Jianji, he would have to squat in the position of county registrar until he died. However, at this time a noble person took a fancy to him and gave him a helping hand. This noble person was Madame Dugu of Chang, and Madame Dugu used the power of her family to help Zhao Gan settle the complicated relationships in Lantian County, provided him with various conveniences, and helped him to create achievements. Finally, he was able to become an official in the capital. From then on, he squatted in the imperial official's residence for another 10 years. From the position of manager, minister counselor, all the way to doctor, he was always doing the most leisurely and least profitable job. He had also thought of working hard to let go of a foreign official position, but Madame Dugu did not agree. If he lost Madame Dugu's support, he would not be able to keep his current position without any connections or background. Fortunately, Madame Dugu was subsidizing his family. Even in Luoyang, his family's life was not considered poor. He had no choice but to suppress his temper and obediently work as a doctor of Sifing. Until today, Madame Dugu, who sent rice and silver to his family on time every month without saying a word, finally gave him a mission: to impeach Yang Fan. He squatted in the imperial official's residence for 10 years and finally received an order. This matter did not excite him. What excited him was the second sentence that the messenger said: "If you do well, the position of examiner will be yours." He was already in his early 50s, and there were already some white hairs on his temples. He had thought that his career had come to an end, but now there was hope. He entered officialdom at the age of 30. For the first 10 years, he moved around as a minor official in various prefectures. For the second 10 years, he squatted in Lantian County. For the third 10 years, he was the most inconspicuous official in the imperial official's residence, the most prominent yamen. The power was always close to him, but it never belonged to him. 10 years was a cycle, and now the opportunity had finally come. Zhao Gan took a deep breath and tried hard to calm his excitement. He carefully thought about every detail of the entire matter that Master Dugu had instructed him to do. He could not miss this opportunity, so he had to do his best and firmly grasp this opportunity. The list of candidate officials was sent to the Political Affairs Hall on the same day, appearing on Li Zhaoda's desk. At the same time, the list of candidate officials that Yang Fan had concocted also appeared on Wu Qingxi's desk. There were very few people on the list that belonged to Wu Qingxi, and this had far exceeded his tolerance limit. Wu Qingxi finally could not hold back any longer. Wu Qingxi's hair stood up in anger, and he punched the table, shaking a high-quality inkstone to the ground and shattering it. Since there was no room for discussion, then let's fight. The next morning, Long Shangguo Yi presented the great treatise to the emperor. It was a voluminous speech of thousands of words, sharp and impassioned, describing Li Xiaoda's domineering and tyrannical behavior, comparing him to a rat who stole the imperial court's power to fulfill his own selfish desires. Feng Hongmin and Zhang Jiafu of the Phoenix Pavilion immediately seconded the motion and impeached Li Xiaoda. Yang Fan? Yang Fan was just a small lackey under Li Xiaoda's tutelage. Killing him would not affect the overall situation. Moreover, the list of southern border officials had not been finalized and had not been announced to the public yet. Logically speaking, Wu Qingxi should not even know the details of the impeachment. Moreover, what kind of person was Wu Qingxi? He was the empress's nephew, and he was the head of the Wu clan. If he fought with Yang Fan, he would lose his status. If he wanted to fight, he would fight the big tiger. Therefore, Wu Qingxi's spearhead was pointed at Li Xiaoda, and he cleverly used Li Xiaoda's harsh and domineering manner to arouse dissatisfaction among the civil and military officials in the imperial court. He only impeached Li Xiaoda for abusing his power and acting like a tyrant. As for the southern border officials, Wu Qingxi did not mention a word about it. The three people's continuous impeachments were like a storm, lightning, and thunder. Li Xiaoda did not expect that with his great imperial favor, there would still be people who dared to impeach him. The civil and military officials of the imperial court also did not expect that there would be people who dared to openly challenge Li Xiaoda in such an unbridled manner, even though the mastermind behind these impeachers was also a domineering and insufferably arrogant person. There were two types of impeachment in the imperial court: impeachment by revealing the seal, and impeachment by sealing the seal. In this type of impeachment, no matter how high the official position was, no matter whether the person was guilty or not, he had to immediately remove his hat, bow, and leave the office. He had to bow respectfully below the imperial steps and await punishment. Li Xiaoda forcefully suppressed his anger, removed his hat, and bowed before the Pill Emperor. He lowered his head that was always held high. Ever since he took sole control of the imperial court, he had never been in such a sorry state. Chapter 652. The entire court was in an uproar. Li Xiaoda was usually arrogant and despotic. Even those of the same rank as the prime minister were often humiliated and scolded by him. The court was silent. Even many of the officials who were still attached to Li Xiaoda were secretly pleased to see him in such a difficult situation because they had been ordered around and humiliated by him. They deliberately pretended to be deaf and dumb and refused to come forward to help him argue. Only a very small number of officials whose honor and disgrace were completely tied to Li Xiaoda jumped out to argue with the Prince of Wei, Wei Qingxi, and his lackeys. Wu Zetian saw that there were people attacking Li Xiaoda, whom she had always doted on, and her face immediately showed an extremely unhappy expression. But as the three officials fervently stated their views and continuously listed Li Xiaoda's words and examples, the unhappy expression on Wu Zetian's face gradually disappeared, especially Zhang Jiafu's words. Ever since His Majesty has lived a long life, he has grown weary of petty politics. The important matters of the court are all entrusted to Li Xiaoda. Foreign and foreign memorials. Li Xiaoda approves. His Majesty has no reason not to approve. Li Xiaoda does not approve. His Majesty has already approved. And according to his request, it is changed to not approve. It deeply touched the most sensitive nerve in Wu Zetian's heart. The foundation of Wu Zetian's power was to let herself be in charge of politics. Riches and honor can be given to others, but the dagger to slit one's throat must never be in the hands of others. Zhang Jiafu's words touched Wu Zetian's reverse scale. Wu Zetian opened her mouth coldly and interrupted the arguments of the officials on both sides. "All right, all of you shut up." The court immediately quieted down. Wu Zetian continued, "Have the censorate investigate the memorials of Deng Zhu, Feng Hongmin, and Zhang Jiafu. Dismiss the court. Li Xiaoda bowed deeply and said sorrowfully, I request that you withdraw and retire from your post. A trace of a smile appeared on Wu Zetian's face. She gently comforted, Prime Minister Li is my arm. How can the court leave my beloved subject? I do not believe in these accusations, but this is the law of the court. Since there are accusations, naturally we must investigate. This way, my beloved subject's innocence can be restored. Xiaoda, don't worry about it. If these words were used by Wu Zetian in private to comfort an old official, it would be extremely appropriate. However, right now, the people who had impeached Li Xiaoda were still there, and the entire court of civil and military officials were still present. The emperor's words were simply openly biased. Li Xiaoda was so excited that his face turned crimson. He bowed deeply, but his chest was so agitated that he couldn't say any words of thanks. Wu Zetian flicked her sleeves, stood up, and walked to the back of Dan Emperor. The eunuch hurriedly waved his horsetail whisk and announced loudly, Emperor, the court is dismissed. Those officials who had not spoken up for Li Xiaoda earlier saw the empress openly show her bias towards Li Xiaoda and hurriedly tried to think of ways to remedy the situation. The emperor had just left the court when a large group of officials pretended to be filled with righteous indignation and shared a common enemy. The ceremonial eunuch glanced at them, and with a horsetail whisk in the crook of his arm, he chased after Wu Zetian. The officials who knew the contents of the Southern Border's official selection list were very clear why Wu Qingxi was making things difficult for Li Xiaoda. For them, the Southern Border's official selection had little to do with them. If they could successfully curry favor, it would be great to find a place for their relatives and nephews. However, seeing the situation of both sides fighting to the death, how would they dare to get involved? Thus, their focus was on the question of who would be able to topple between Wu Qingxi and Li Xiaoda. Wu Qingxi had only been the prime minister for half a year when Wu Zetian first ascended the throne. His evil deeds weren't obvious. Although the officials were afraid of the Wu clan, they didn't have too much disgust towards Wu Qingxi. On the other hand, Li Xiaoda's reputation was already in tatters. Most of the civil and military officials didn't have a good impression of him. In this current situation, it was already very good of them to not throw stones at him while he was down. How could they still wholeheartedly protect Li Xiaoda? Li Xiaoda wasn't worth protecting, and Wu Qingxi was even more so not to be offended. This rare political storm in the court also spread to the imperial court at the fastest speed. Once the Minister of Defense, Zhao Gan, was informed of what had happened in the court, he immediately realized that the reason why these two influential figures had come to blows was because of the Southern Border's official selection, and this matter was specifically handled by Yang Fan. The clan lord has just sent an order for me to gather evidence and prepare to impeach Yang Fan. Wei Wang has already started to make things difficult for Yang Fan's backer. Could it be that the clan lord has already joined forces with Wei Wang? Zhao Gan's eyes suddenly lit up. He had always believed in the clan lord's ability, and the first person to make things difficult for him was a colossus like Wu Qingxi. This gave him boundless confidence. That night, Minister Zhao stayed up all night in his study. For the sake of his bright future, he busied himself just like he did for the imperial examinations back then. He lit the lamp and boiled the oil to prepare dirt on Yang Fan. There was no morning court the next day. Wu Zetian woke up early and had her breakfast. She was chatting and laughing with Zhang Yizhi and Zhang Changzong as they sat on the lovely spring terrace. Suddenly, the eunuch came over with a memorial wrapped in yellow silk. He came to Wu Zetian's side and whispered in her ear, "Everyone, the Shangguan imperial court has sent an urgent messenger to impeach." The Shangguan Wan could read and approve ordinary memorials, but military and national affairs had to be forwarded to Empress Wu. The other thing was the impeachment of impeachment. This kind of memorial had to be opened by the emperor himself, and the content of the memorial could only be known by the emperor alone. If the emperor felt that it was insignificant and left the memorial unpublished, then no one else would ever know about it. Wu Zetian casually took the memorial and handed it over to Zhang Changzong with a smile, saying, "Sixth Lang, open it for me." Zhang Changzong complied and examined the wax seal. He took out a jade knife and opened the memorial. He did not hand it over to Wu Zetian, but sat on the side of Wu Zetian's bed and read it. Wu Zetian laughed and said, "Sixth Lang has crossed the line. He deserves to be punished." She raised her hand and patted his buttocks affectionately. "Ouch!" Zhang Changzong pretended to be in pain and cried out in alarm. He jumped up and handed the memorial to Wu Zetian. He said with a smile, "Sage, take a look. This man has eaten a bear's heart and a leopard's gall. He dares to impeach Prime Minister Li." "Oh!" The smile on Wu Zetian's face turned cold. She took the memorial from his hand. After Wu Qingxi, Princess Taiping's men also made their move. However, no one knew that he was Princess Taiping's man because this man was not an official of the imperial court, but an official of the former imperial court. His name was Qiuming, and he was a military officer of the Lu Palace. The king of Lu, Li Lingkue, was the 19th son of the Tang Gaozu, Li Yuan, and the brother of Li Shimin. After the king of Yu, Li Zhen's rebellion failed, Li Lingkue was also implicated and exiled to Jinzhou, where he committed suicide. Most of the officials in the Prince of Lu's household were implicated, but this Qiuming was originally an official sent by the court to monitor the Prince of Lu. Strictly speaking, he was not one of the Prince of Lu's people. In addition, he had an outstanding reputation in the scholarly community. Therefore, he was only relieved of his official position and stayed at home. He used to be an official of the imperial court, so he always had the right to submit memorials to the emperor. Therefore, this secret memorial was sent to the palace. In terms of literary talent, Old Master Qiu was much more brilliant than Deng Zhu, Feng Hongmin, and Zhang Jiafu. Every word in the memorial was as sharp as a sword. This subject has heard of the mistakes of 100 kings, and all authority belongs to you. When the prime minister was in charge of politics, his power was often the bane of his life. Wei Rant's execution of the commoners to appease Qin was not a sign of disloyalty. It was also a meritorious deed for a weak feudal lord to strengthen a strong state. However, he acted on his own, broke Wuji, awed the ruler, and did not hear of a king. Zhao De's temperament was arrogant, unyielding, blind, and deaf people were like dogs and straw. He was harsh and unjust. The country relied on little, but the harm was great. The world was silent, no one dared to speak a word. His prestige was impressive, and the sun was blazing. Han Guang's generals favored Pang Meng and could entrust him with an orphan. Emperor Ming of Wei wanted Sima Yi to pacify the country, but dared to rape back. Today Zhao De is ruling the country, dominating the court. Love, hate, and plunder, as if there was no one else around. His Majesty's kindness is deep, and his cover is very thick. This subject has heard of ants burying a dam, and needles writing qi. Trickling without end will become a river. After Wu Zetian finished reading the memorial, she was stunned speechless. Qiuming was old, and he had retired a long time ago. He was a famous scholar in the literary world. What reason did he have to attack Li Zhaoda, who had power over the court? It was impossible for him to have any connections with the various factions in the court. There could only be one motive. He was sincerely serving the country. However, Li Zhaoda, had he really become so domineering? Thinking of the examples of powerful officials in Qiuming's memorial, Wu Zetian felt a chill in her heart. The wind blew her white hair, gently brushing past her wrinkled face that could no longer be concealed. There was not a trace of expression on her face. Zhang Changzong whispered the contents of the memorial to his brother. Zhang Yiji rolled his eyes and laughed. This surname Qiu is really bold. He even dared to impeach Prime Minister Li. He must be tired of living. Oh. Wu Zetian slowly raised her head and looked at Zhang Yiji. She said without batting an eyelid, "Why?" Does Wulong think that this Chioming is arrogant and ignorant? Zhang Yiji said, of course. Prime Minister Li assists His Majesty and is in charge of the country's affairs. He is conscientious and is respected by all. He is the right-hand man of the saint. I don't know who has bewitched this old dog to dare to slander Prime Minister Li with his greedy words. He really doesn't know what death is. Wu Zetian's body trembled. She turned to Zhang Changzong and asked, Wulong, do you also think so? Zhang Changzong had already understood his brother's meaning. He quickly tilted his head and thought. He pretended to be naive and said, Changzong is still young and doesn't know much about the affairs of the court. However, even though Changzong has been in the court for a long time, I have heard of Prime Minister Li's reputation. Prime Minister Li is the pillar of the country. How can he allow this ignorant man to slander him? The saint should punish him severely to appease Prime Minister Li. Ha! Wu Zetian laughed for no reason. She waved the memorial in her hand and said slowly, It is not easy to know a person, and it is not easy to know a person. Zhao Da, as the Minister of Internal Affairs, has a special honor. If it is, as this memorial says, then he has let me down and let the country down. Zhang Changzong blinked and asked with surprise, Is the saint saying that Prime Minister Li is guilty? Wu Zetian slowly shook her head and said, You don't understand. Leave, I want to be alone for a while. Yes. Zhang Yiji and his brother didn't dare to say anything else. They left together. Wu Zetian put her hand on her forehead and was silent in thought. After a long time, a servant quietly walked to her side. He bowed and said, Your Majesty, Li Zhaoda requests an audience. Wu Zetian looked like she had just woken up from a nap. She shook her body and said calmly to the servant, The Prime Minister has been slandered and has not met the Son of Heaven. Isn't this giving the truth to others? As long as you have a clear conscience, your heart will be calm. What is there to panic about? Let Prime Minister Li return home in peace. Chapter 653. Li Zhaoda was wearing a brown robe and a pair of shoes. He didn't even wear a crown on his head. He stood outside the palace gate with a bald head. Hearing the servant's words, Li Zhaoda stood there in a daze, his face stupefied. He had come today to take a step back in order to advance. Although the emperor had already shown that he was partial to him in court yesterday, he still wanted to go one step further. Therefore, he dressed himself like this and walked to the palace, pretending to be asking for forgiveness and resignation. According to his expectations, the emperor would certainly treat him well. He would invite him to a banquet or send him back to his mansion in an imperial carriage. The news would spread all over the city in an instant. Those who saw the wind blow would naturally know what to do, and the situation would not be peaceful. Who would have thought? The emperor's words seemed to be comforting, but the emperor's actions clearly had a kind of coldness. At this moment, he deeply regretted his actions. This time, he had outsmarted himself. Who would have thought that the emperor would be so fickle? After the young servant finished passing on the oral order, he smiled politely at him and returned to the palace. Li Zhaoda stood in a daze at the palace gate for a long time until he discovered that the warriors standing at the palace gate were looking at him with sympathy. This deeply hurt his self-esteem. Li Zhaoda suddenly turned around and walked out of the palace with large strides. He walked with his chest out and his head held high. But his straight back, no matter how you looked at it, revealed a sense of sorrow. Prime Minister Li, dressed in a coarse robe, took off his hat and tied up his hair, and went to the palace to ask for forgiveness, but the emperor did not see him. The news of his fruitless return quickly spread throughout the city, and the officials immediately smelled something different. Some of them immediately went to the study, dismissed the page boys, and began to write a secret memorial. Some people began to burn the letters and poems exchanged with Prime Minister Li, or they took down the inscribed board that Li Zhaoda had written before. They had their families take it to the backyard and hide it in the woodshed. If the situation turned bad, they would immediately chop it into firewood. The next day, when the court met again, the winds had changed. Although most of the officials adopted a safe position, waiting to see what would happen or submitting secret memorials of impeachment, there were still some bold opportunists who openly joined the impeachment of Li Jiaoda. As always, Li Jiaoda went out without a hat and bowed to listen to the memorials. When the officials finished impeaching him, he asked to leave. This time, Wu Zetian did not ask him to stay and coldly agreed to his request. Li Jiaoda temporarily left the government hall and returned to his mansion to wait for the memorials. The impeachment was not only an opportunity to express their stance and fight for a higher position. It was not only a way to vent Li Jiaoda's merciless humiliation. It was also a way to of their own. Impeachment wasn't just a chance to express their stance and fight for a promotion. It wasn't just a way to vent Li Jiaoda's merciless humiliation and reprimand. It was also a way for them to clear their names. Frankly speaking, Li Jiaoda was not a treacherous official. Admittedly, he was passionate about power, and for this reason he excluded and suppressed those who might threaten him. The prime ministers that he pulled into the political affairs hall were all people who could not stand shoulder to shoulder with him and could not fight against him. Furthermore, he was arbitrary and tyrannical. But when it came to major issues of right and wrong, he was still able to control himself. Although Wu Zetian was the only empress who had never been before or after, she still had many of the characteristics of a woman. When she trusts a person, it will be absolute. Even if this person does something wrong, she will be extremely lenient and even show a biased attitude. Although Wu Zetian was the first and only female empress in history, she still had many unique characteristics of a woman. When she trusted someone, she would trust them absolutely. Even if that person did something wrong, she would be extremely lenient and even show favoritism towards them. In fact, this was not a characteristic of a woman. Many wise rulers had similar characteristics. Perhaps this characteristic came from their extreme self-confidence. Therefore, before this self-confidence was broken, they could blindly trust a person. Once this self-confidence was broken, they would be extremely lenient and even show a biased attitude. In fact, this could not be considered a woman's characteristic. Many wise rulers had similar characteristics. Perhaps this characteristic originated from their extreme self-confidence. Thus, before this self-confidence was broken, they could blindly trust a person. Once this self-confidence was broken, they would feel that they had been deceived and would hate a person to the extreme. Li Jiaoda could not sit still. He could see the changes in the emperor and the officials clearly. He knew that if he continued to sit and wait, it was the same as waiting for death. He made one last effort. He did not try to win back the emperor's favor. Instead, he once again retreated in order to advance, hoping to save himself. He submitted a letter of 10,000 words to carry out self-blame and self-impeachment, reflecting on his arbitrary and domineering behavior during the period of assisting the government, and asked for forgiveness from the emperor. Once the empress was disgusted with a person, she wouldn't even bother with superficial courtesy. She immediately accepted Li Jiaoda's impeachment and issued a decree to demote Li Jiaoda to the assistant minister of the Phoenix Pavilion. Li Jiaoda would be promoted to the Nanbin County Magistrate of Qinzhou, Lingnan West Road. She ordered him to take up the post in the Shirwan Mountains of Guangxi. After receiving the empress's decree, Li Jiaoda seemed to have aged 10 years all of a sudden. He sat in a daze for a long time and then gave a long sigh. He ordered his family to pack up and prepare to take up the post. At this time, the number of impeachment memorials didn't decrease, but increased day by day. At this time, there were no more people from Wu Sanxi or Princess Taiping secretly adding fuel to the fire. Instead, the accumulated resentment of the civil and military officials against Li Jiaoda was like a flood that broke the dam and finally broke out. The impeachment memorials were sent to Wu Zetian like snowflakes. Because these memorials were impeaching officials, Shanghai Wanner had no power to deal with them. They were all handed to Wu Zetian for her to read personally. The more Wu Zetian read, the angrier she became. Yesterday he was still an important official that she praised endlessly, but today he was a deadly tumor. There were memorials to defend and appeal for Li Zhaoda, but they had long been annihilated in this snowflake of impeachment memorials. Li Zhaoda hadn't packed up and prepared to take up the post in the Sherwan Mountains when the Empress issued another imperial decree. She removed Li Zhaoda from the position of Nanbin County Magistrate and exiled him to Lingnan Prison Prefecture. Young Master Jiang felt that his black and glossy hair that even women would be envious of was about to turn white. He couldn't understand the series of changes in the court at all. It wasn't that young Master Jiang was stupid, but that everything that was happening in the court really couldn't have any positive connection with what Yang Fan should be doing. On the contrary, looking at the current situation, this storm could only be harmful to Yang Fan without any benefit. After Yang Fan submitted his preliminary list, there weren't many descendants of aristocratic families on it. Instead, Li Zhaoda's party and Wu Sanxi's party made up the majority. This list incited a strong backlash from Wu Qingxi. Even the Zhang brothers of the internal court were very dissatisfied, so they launched a counterattack against Li Zhaoda. The reason Wu Sanxi wasn't the target of their counterattack was because Wu Sanxi was Wu Zetian's nephew. For Wu Qingxi, strengthening Wu Sanxi's party was a great harm to him. But for Wu Zetian, as long as the Wu family's power grew, it was beneficial to her. She was happy to see this happen, and attacking Wu Sanxi wouldn't have much of an effect. In the end, Li Zhaoda wasn't good at managing his own power. His seemingly powerful political foundation had long been destroyed by his straightforward and domineering personality. This large tree seemed to reach the clouds, but its insides had long been eaten away by insects and would fall with a single gust of wind. In this way, Yang Fan would most likely be caught in the crossfire. What exactly did he want to do? Young Master Jiang thought hard for a long time and repeatedly deliberated, but he still couldn't determine Yang Fan's true intentions. His brows couldn't help but furrow deeper and deeper. He didn't know what Yang Fan wanted to do, but he couldn't just sit and watch. No matter what, this opportunity couldn't be missed. Thinking of this, young Master Jiang slightly relaxed his brows. He raised his head and said to Yuan Tingyan, "Have Gawain impeach Yang Fan." Yuan Tingyan was very excited. Young Master had finally decided to act. He nodded heavily and immediately walked out. Gawain was the right assistant imperial censor of the imperial censor, someone that the Lu family had raised. After young Master Jiang was deposed, all of connections in the officialdom controlled by Xianzong were taken over by Yang Fan. Even though young Master Jiang was proud and was not willing to ask the family for help, there were many times when he had to use the connections that the Lu family had painstakingly built up over many years. Among the most important assets of every large family, there was a list of names that could only be personally held by the head of the family. It was like the mafia leaders in The Godfather locked away in the most secret safe and only passed on to their heirs when they died. The people on that list had either been raised up by them, or they had been fed with real money for many years, or they were secret allies that had been established based on their interests. Old Master Lu doted on this eldest grandson, but he didn't dare to let him squander the family's resources. After returning to Fanyang, he only copied down the names of 3 people from the list and gave them to young Master Jiang. This Gawain was one of them. Young Master Jiang could not wait any longer. He had to send someone to test the waters and see how Yang Fan would respond. Yang Fan lay on his side on the large luohan bed, enjoying a rare moment of father and son alone time with his precious son. On the luohan bed, the bed table in the middle had already been removed. Yang Yanzu was lying next to him, kicking and grabbing. He quickly grabbed the jade pendant on his father's waist. His feet pushed against his father's hip bone, and he forced his body to turn over. His little mouth was foaming, and he grinned at his old man in a very happy manner. Yang Fan used a handkerchief to wipe away the foam at the corner of his mouth. Yang Yanzu impatiently turned his head. "Boy, you still have a little sister. Do you miss her?" Yang Ninzu worked hard to spit out another ball of saliva and smeared it on his pink lips that had just been wiped clean. He gave his old man a victorious smile. Good boy. Yang Fan's fingers gently scratched his chubby little face. His voice became low and his eyes became very emotional. Son, your father also has an elder sister. She is your aunt, your biological aunt. Your aunt is very beautiful, very gentle, and she loves your father very much. Unfortunately, your aunt passed away early and will never be able to love you. Yang Fan's eyes were a little moist. He blinked his eyes to wipe away the tears in his eyes. He whispered to his still ignorant son, This kind of thing will not happen to you again. Father will definitely find her elder sister and bring her back. Don't you think so? Yang Yinzu's pair of black eyes stared at his father. He made a sound of agreement and grinned again. Yang Fan also smiled. He gently patted his little butt and dotingly said, You are really a silly boy. Your father has just become a big official and he is about to lose it. He is going to be in big trouble. Why are you still smiling? Yang Yinzu's little mouth grinned. The smile touched his entire face. The curve of his face was raised and he smiled even more happily. Chapter 654. When news of Li Xiaoda's exile to Lingnan spread, the list of selected officials was finally made public. This was all thanks to Li Xiaoda's efficiency. He already knew who to use and who not to use. As soon as the list of candidates for Yang Fan's position was announced, he immediately circled out his preferred candidate. As a result, he was charged with yet another crime. As soon as the list of selected officials was announced, Imperial Censor Gao Wen accused the Heavenly Magistrate of abusing his authority for personal gain. He formed cliques and divided up the public resources in an unscrupulous manner. This time, the spearhead was directed at Yang Fan. When Li Xiaoda was around, he was the tallest and largest tree. The tallest tree attracted the most wind, so all the storms were directed at him. With Li Xiaoda gone, the smaller tree, Yang Fan, was exposed. He became the new target of attack. However, Yang Fan was a smaller tree, not a monkey on Li Xiaoda's tree. His roots were still connected to Wu Sanxi. That was why all the officials saw Gao Wen's accusation of Yang Fan as a test from Wu Qingxi. Was the battle between the two of them about to begin again? Because of this worry, the officials did not immediately pick a side. They wanted to see what was going on, to see which of King Liang and King Wei the Emperor would side with. King Wei was also puzzled by this, because Gao Wen was not one of his people. Yang Fan had brought down both Li Xiaoda and Wu Sanxi. That was why Wu Qingxi was in no hurry to deal with him. Li Xiaoda had already fallen. But even though Li Xiaoda was harsh by nature, he still had a few trusted aides. Wu Sanxi was busy gathering his forces to clean up Li Xiaoda's remaining cliques in one fell swoop. Yang Fan was not yet in the position to do so. However, Gao Wen's actions had brought the entire process forward. Yang Fan was a doctor and did not have the right to participate in the court. Therefore, when Gawain impeached him, he was not in the court. He only heard the news after the court meeting, and it was Chen Dong from the Ministry of Justice who sent him the news. He did not hear the direct accusation because Wu Zetian accepted the memorial but did not make any comments in court. Young Master Jiang had received news from his informant that after Yang Fan learned that he was being impeached, his expression remained the same and his behavior was calm, without any abnormal movements. However, another of his informants sent him news that before noon, Yang Fan left the heavenly official residence. He first went to the Liang residence before going to the Gentleness Square alone. In the Gentleness Square's oldest brothel, the Gentleness Square, he invited the current top hostess of the brothel, Lady Gentleness, to play the zither and serve him wine. He only left drunkenly at dusk. Young Master Jiang combined all of Yang Fan's previous strange actions and did not believe that Yang Fan was pretending to be calm, but was actually panicking. Instead, he was even more certain that Yang Fan was up to something. He had no choice but to be more cautious, but he still did not know what Yang Fan's goal was and what he wanted to do. Yang Fan did this not for him to see, but for the other civil and military officials to see. What would they think after hearing this news? Zhao Gan did not expect that someone would beat him to the punch and impeach Yang Fan. He was quite anxious when he heard the news. Fortunately, Imperial Censor Gao Wen's impeachment didn't seem to have any effect. The emperor's attitude was ambiguous, and he had no intention of punishing Yang Fan. Only then did Zhao Gan calm down. On the evening of the second day, Clan Lord Duga's men finally delivered the last batch of information he needed. It was great to have the backing of such a powerful clan. If not for the Dugas, he would not have been able to gather so much evidence on his own. If he wanted to impeach him, he could only use some superficial words like Gaowen. However, he was not an imperial censor and did not have the privilege of hearing reports. Now that he had the irrefutable evidence in hand, Zhao Gan was finally at ease. Zhao Gan did not sleep for the whole night. The lamp in his study was lit until the rooster crowed. The bell on the heavenly gate rang throughout the city. When he finally came out of the study, his eyes were bloodshot, but he was in high spirits. He did not even have the appetite for breakfast, and went to court in high spirits. When the court session was halfway through, and most of the main topics had come to an end, Wu Zetian, who had been sitting in the court for too long, was exhausted. She was about to fall asleep. At this moment, the eunuch standing in the hall heard a few words from a servant and immediately walked to her side. He bowed and said, "Zhao Gan, the Minister of Seal of the Heavenly Official Court, begs your Majesty to allow him to go to the palace hall and show his name to impeach him." Oh! Wu Zetian's spirits rose. She had spent most of her life fighting with concubines, foreign officials, and the world. It was as if she had developed a hobby for snitching. She immediately ordered, "Summon him to court." The eunuch spun around and announced in a clear voice, "His Majesty has decreed that Minister Zhao Gan of the Heavenly Official Residence shall present himself to the Emperor to be impeached." The officials who had been standing for half a day felt their hearts skip a beat. In a feudal dynasty, only the Emperor was not to be offended. He could only be remonstrated, but not impeached. Anyone below the crown prince could be impeached. Who was going to be unlucky this time? Zhao Gan, who was waiting outside the court, heard the voice that seemed to come from the highest heavens. He immediately walked into the court, his heart about to jump out of his throat. Although he had long practiced the etiquette of having an audience with the emperor, this was the first time he stepped into the divine palace of Wanxiang, and this was the first time he was so close to the empress. As soon as Zhao Gan spoke, the officials heaved a sigh of relief. "It's not me." Then their spirits rose. The second round of the battle between the two generals has begun. But in the next moment, they were on tenterhooks again. Zhao Gan was accusing Yang Fan, but the crimes and scandals he brought up were those of the courtiers and their families. Zhao Gan's accusation of impeaching Yang Fan was not as serious as Gaowen made it out to be, nor was it as blatant. He did not accuse Gaowen of forming cliques and stealing public resources, but of neglecting his duties and neglecting his duties. To put it lightly, it was a problem of the official's attitude or even ability. However, Zhao Gan was not as eloquent as Gaowen. He spoke passionately but did not have much evidence. Zhao Gan did not speak empty words, only evidence. To prove that Yang Fan was neglecting his duties, Zhao Gan commented on the candidates, one by one with examples. Of course, not all of the officials had a handle on them, and not all of them had a handle that could be used against them. However, the problem was that Yang Fan first checked whether they had a handle on them, and then stuffed those who had a handle on them into the candidate list. What else could be said? In an instant, Zhao Gan, who had always kept a low profile, was in the limelight in the imperial court. The ministers and assistant ministers of the imperial censorate were dumbfounded. The officials of the imperial censorate were ashamed that Zhao Gan's evidence was more professional than theirs. The former provincial governor of Azhou, Yang Jinxian, was removed from his post due to corruption and should not have been rehired. Furthermore, I found that Yang Jinxian was not content after his retirement. His nephew, Yang Qi, fought with a neighbor over a trivial matter and injured someone. He should have been sentenced to death by hanging, but Yang Jinxian interfered with the justice system and was only sentenced to exile. But just a year later, Yang Qi, who should have been exiled to Yaozhou, swaggered on the streets of Luoyang. How can such a person be an official? When Zhao Gan entered the hall, his hands and legs were weak and his heart was beating like thunder. But now that he spoke, his expression was firm and his voice was powerful. If one did not stand out, how could one rise to the top? This was a political speculation, a gamble. If one did not have the guts, one might as well not enter the game. Zhao Gan was born poor and had no connections. He was a loner and had few friends. But he had the guts. Lin Manzhuang, the secretary of the Secretariat, had 2 sons. They were stubborn and mischievous and did not strive to improve themselves. They only liked to fight and run dogs. Their talents were mediocre, and everyone knew this when they were studying in the Imperial College. But both of his sons actually passed the examination and became a jinshi. The court and the public have long criticized him. And now, both of Lin Manzhuang's sons have been selected as officials of the southern border. I request your majesty to look at their examination papers and personally test their talents. If their names do not match up, not only can they not be officials, Lin Manzhuang will also be severely punished. These people had the qualifications to be officials, but there had never been a vacancy for them to be appointed as candidates or officials who had always been in idle positions. It was not easy to find fault with their achievements, but everything that Zhao Gan said had a great deal to do with them being officials. It was enough to be used as evidence that they were not fit to be officials. Zhao Gan pointed out the faults of 7 or 8 officials in one breath and let out a long sigh, calming down his excited mood. The court officials were still in suspense. Everyone could see that he had not finished speaking, but no one knew who he was going to point to next. Finally, Zhao Gan's clear voice sounded again. The minister of Taichung, Pei Zhen, in the 7th month of the 3rd year of Chuegong, his father passed away. He was removed from his post and returned to the court in the 10th month of the 1st year of Yongchang. Zhao Gan's voice paused, and a mocking smile appeared on his face. In the 3rd month of the 1st year of Zaichu, Pei Zhen gave birth to a son. These 2 sentences were simply inexplicable. All the civil and military officials in the court were puzzled and did not understand what was going on. Thanks to Wu Zetian's good habit of changing the year title every few days, sometimes even 2 or 3 times a year, the court officials put their hands in their sleeves and started counting the days with their fingers. The court suddenly became extremely quiet. After a while, someone exclaimed softly as if he had a sudden realization. Then, more and more people came to their senses. From the 7th month of the 3rd year of Chuegong to the 10th month of the 1st year of Yongchang, it was exactly 27 months. This was the time when the officials had to return to their ancestral home to mourn after their parents passed away. From the 10th month of the 1st year of Yongchang to the 3rd month of the 1st year of Zaichu, this was a period of 5 months. In other words, Pei Zhen gave birth to a son 5 months after his mourning ended. What was the problem here? The Dingyu ceremony stipulated that during the period of Dingyu, one was not allowed to leave the house, eat meat or fish, drink alcohol, sleep with his wife or concubines, listen to music, or even bathe or change clothes. It was best to live in a hut beside a grave and stay there for 27 months. But Pei Shaoqing had only ended Dingyu for 5 months, and his son was born. When was his son conceived? This was not a small matter at that time. Filial piety was the most important of all virtues. If a person could not even be filial to his birth parents, how could one expect him to be loyal to the emperor and love the people? Pei Zhen was dejected and his face was pale. How could he not know that this child was a scourge? However, he only had a few daughters and not a son. At that time, his concubine was pregnant and he could not bear to use medicine to abort the pregnancy. He only hoped to have a son. Heaven had eyes, and the Pei family's descendants did not die out. Unexpectedly, the retribution for sleeping with his wife and concubine during the mourning period came today. Taichung Temple's Shaoqing was on the same level as the provincial governor. If he did not covet the real power of the provincial governor, he would not have begged King Liang to curry favor with him, who knew that his future would be ruined by his greed. Today, even if he wanted to regret it, there was nothing he could do. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Wang Lei, looked at him sympathetically and thought to himself, "Old Pei is finished. Yang Fan, that slippery little loach, will not be able to escape this time." Chapter 655. Zhao Gan's impeachment did not have any grand theories or flowery words. Everything he said was the truth. A large number of Southern Borders officials fell from power because of the rebellion of the Southern Borders barbarians. The barbarians rebelled not only because of the extortion and oppression from the censorate, but also because they had long been in conflict with the local officials. Because of this, Wu Zetian was determined to reform the Southern Borders governance and improve the relationship between the court and the local barbarians. Zhao Gan's various deeds were like a slap to Wu Zetian's face. These were the officials she had chosen? Would these people be more competent than their predecessors when they were sent to the southern border? Before this, Imperial Censor Gao Wen had accused Yang Fan of forming a clique for personal gain. Wu Zetian didn't care at all. She wanted Yang Fan to form a clique for the Wu clan's personal gain. However, she couldn't tolerate the selection of such a group of officials. Enough! Don't say any more. Wu Zetian suddenly burst into a thunderous rage. She slammed her palm down and waved her sleeves. The list of candidates is invalid. Yang Fan will listen in seclusion. Court dismissed. Wu Zetian left the Golden Palace with a sunken expression, leaving all of the officials and generals in the Golden Palace. The sudden turmoil in the court stemmed from the sudden appearance of more opportunities and benefits. The promotion of any prime minister was enough to attract the attention of the court officials. Every time there was a vacancy for a prime minister, the qualified officials would spare no effort to form cliques, bribe people, build momentum, and think of ways to attract the attention of the emperor. Those officials who were not qualified to be selected were even busier than them. Every new prime minister would build up his own team. These officials had to carefully analyze and select who had the most hope of becoming prime minister. They had to bribe them in advance, express their support, and choose which side to stand on. Naturally, this time was no exception, especially since Li Zhaoda had monopolized the power of the prime minister. His strong desire for power caused him to meddle in every matter, big or small, and firmly hold the power in his own hands. The other prime ministers had become mere decorations, and once Li Zhaoda fell, none of the other prime ministers had the prestige and power to monopolize the court. In other words, anyone who could enter the political affairs hall would become a prime minister with real power. This position was naturally coveted by everyone. Following Li Zhaoda's fall, his trusted aides like Lu Qinhuang were also demoted. Correspondingly, there were a number of vacancies for high-ranking officials. These positions also needed to be filled. At the same time, the list of southern border officials had been invalidated, and a new batch of officials was needed. The positions of these high officials in the imperial court were coveted by those in power now. The positions of those local officials with real power in the southern border. They also wanted to strive hard to obtain them for their own sons and nephews, comrades, and disciples. A series of interests formed political whirlpools of various sizes, converging into a monstrous wave that could swallow everything. When Assistant Minister Wang Lei informed Yang Fan that he was going back to his residence to await his return, he said with a fake smile, "Yang Fan, go home and rest for a few days. Don't worry. As long as you are acting in the interest of the public, the court will naturally give you justice. After the truth is revealed, you will still be a member of the heavenly official mansion." Originally, whenever Wang Lei saw Yang Fan, he would politely address him as Yang Langzhong. At this time, Yang Langzhong was still Yang Langzhong. It was just that because he was being impeached, he had to avoid meeting him as a matter of routine. Therefore, Wang Lei impolitely addressed him directly by his name. Yang Fan did not seem to hear the coldness in his words. His face was still very calm. I have just been appointed, and I am not very clear about many things yet. As a result, I have made such a big mess for the heavenly magistrate. I am really ashamed. I still have to trouble Assistant Minister Wang to clean up this mess. You have worked hard, worked hard. The smile on Wang Lei's face suddenly froze. He then remembered that with Yang Fan's departure, the selection of officials in the southern border would most likely fall on his head. Usually, if there was an official vacancy, it would be a very lucrative job. Whoever arranged it would benefit. But now, it was a game of several political giants. It was definitely not a good thing to be involved in it. When Yang Fan returned to the detention room, Li Jinghu was instructing a few servants to help him pack up his things. As soon as he saw Yang Fan enter, Li Jinghu quickly came up to greet him. His waist was stiff, but before he could bend down, he bounced up again. Only his voice was still considered polite. Yang Langzhong, you have returned. I have already asked people to help pack up your things. Li Jinghu's tone, smile, demeanor, everything seemed to be no different from before. It was just that he had subtly and quietly changed the humble title to I, and it seemed so natural. That kind of coldness was like the unknowingly arriving autumn. Yang Fan smiled and sighed in his heart. It was not the first time he had experienced the coldness of officialdom, seeing that the servants had tied up the things they were packing, and that the small bag was being packed. They were all twisting their waists and thumping their shoulders in exhaustion. They had no intention of helping him move it out, so he smiled and nodded. Thank you. Yang Fan stepped forward, picked up the tied-up package, threw it over his shoulder, and strode out. In life, one could only fight for oneself, and there was no need to say anything to others. A rich person could borrow 100 taels of silver, but a poor person could not ask for half a rice. There were few gentlemen who sent charcoal in the snow, but there were many people who added flowers to embroidery. One should not rely on relatives and friends, and the feelings of the world were thinner than the floating clouds. If one were to talk about relatives, it had to be friends and relatives. While Yang Fan was in seclusion, Qin Dong, Feng Shihue, Yuan Han, and a group of old friends from the Ministry of Justice came to visit him without avoiding suspicion. Hu Yuanli, Sun Yuxuan, and a group of friends who had gone through trials and tribulations with him also immediately came to visit. The group of brothers he had met in the army, such as Huang Xuchang, Zhang Shidong, Wei Yong, Li Dayan, and the others were all there. Speaking of which, military officers did not consider as much as civil officials, and did not have many scruples. If they treated you as a friend, they would support you unreservedly. Ma Qiao and Chu Kuanga were Yang Fan's best friends. When Yang Fan had been labeled as a traitor by Lai Junqin, they still had no scruples in associating with him. Of course, they could not be left out at this time. A true friend might not see you every day, but when you were in trouble, he would definitely be by your side. For a moment, Yang Fan's residence was livelier than usual. The group of military officers really did not have much to say. They did not know how to comfort people. Weren't the brothers feeling suffocated? Come, let's drink. It'll be great when we're drunk. They seemed to be afraid that the Yang family would not be able to afford wine, so they brought over a cart of wine themselves. They had the Yang family's chef prepare a few dishes, and then dragged Yang Fan to his seat. They began to drink in large bowls, as if all of Yang Fan's worries would vanish like smoke in thin air after getting drunk. The civil officials were much more meticulous. Sun Yuxuan took a few sips and began to persuade him. Why does Erling have to sit at home all day? Our positions are lowly, and our words do not carry much weight. We cannot help Erling much, but Erling has a wide network, and there are many people who can help, if they are willing to speak up for Erling. Yang Fan shook his head and said with a smile, This little brother understands brother Sun's good intentions. It's just that this case involves a lot of people. All the people in the court are staring at it with their eyes wide open. Even the slightest movement of grass in the wind can't be hidden from people. If I go to their door to ask for help, it will give others a reason to say something, and they won't be able to speak up for me. Hu Yuanli said, Erlang still has King Liang behind him. It's easy to mess with Erlang, but what should we do next? Say that Erlang has formed a faction? Who has Erlang formed a faction with? Hey, if this case is treated as a collusion case, the one who will lose the most face is His Majesty. Therefore, this matter, at most, is just a crime of carelessness. How serious can the consequences be? Erlang's family is wealthy, and he does not need to worry about this laborious official position. Besides, a day as an official, a lifetime as an official. Even if Erlang loses his official position, he still has an official status. Official positions can be transferred, demoted, and dismissed, but an official status is different. As long as they are not exiled, an official who has lost his official position can still preside over associations and undertake litigation. The yamen runners and bailiffs have to be respectful when they see them, and the prefectural and county magistrates have to visit them to ask for advice. Yang Fan knew that he had good intentions, and was afraid that he would take things too hard, so he smiled and nodded in agreement. Chen Dong coughed and said, while stroking his beard, as an official, as long as it is not a big mistake, even if he is removed from his official position, it won't be long before he can get another official position, such as managing the temple, supervising the official projects, participating in the education of the officials, and so on. Erlang's case involves the Wu family, and it involves His Majesty's face, so it won't be too severe. Feng Shihui's eyes brightened, and he said cheerfully, yes. There are 3 types of removal from office in our court. Removal from office, and removal from office forever. Let's just say that he would never be able to use it again. That was the most severe punishment, but so what? He can still be reinstated. The future is long, and Erlang is still so young. As long as he works hard, there will be a chance for him to come back. Yang Fan did not know whether to laugh or cry as he raised his cup and said, all right, everyone, don't worry about this matter. I am wholeheartedly serving the public, and I have a clear conscience. As for the court's decision, we can just quietly wait for the news. As for the plans that everyone has mentioned, it is still too early to plan them. Come, let's drink. Let those nobles worry about those dirty things. Sun Yuxuan shook his head and said with a bitter smile, Erlang is open-minded. I really cannot compare. Chu Kuanga, Ma Qiao, Zhang Shidong, Li Dayan, and the other generals immediately picked up their wine bowls and shouted, Erlang is right, come, let's drink. At the same time, the Assistant Minister of War, Yao Chong, was also holding a banquet in Yao Yuanji's residence. The banquet was held in the study. There was a pot of wine, 2 kinds of dried fruits, and 2 people sitting opposite each other behind the table. Yao Chong was wearing a brown robe, his tall and sturdy body stretched out with strong lines, and his rough face was sharp and angular. Over 50 years old, he still looked as healthy as a man in the prime of his life. After all, he was from a family of generals. As long as he did not neglect his martial arts, he would still be full of blood and vitality in his 50s, and his body would be strong and vigorous. Opposite him was a white-haired, thin and scholarly old man. The old man sipped the wine and ate a big jujube, enjoying himself. Yao Chong smiled and said, Duke Win, is Duke Zhang doing well in Jingzhou? The person called Duke Win called Zhang Jianji's name and said with a smile, although General Meng is old, his hearing and eyes are still sharp, and his body is healthy. 1 meal of his is worth 2 meals of mine. With that, the 2 laughed at each other. After the laughter stopped, Duke Win leaned forward slightly and said in a low voice, Li Zhaoda has left his post, and Yuanji, you are one of the most promising candidates to become the Prime Minister. However, Duke Zhang thinks that Yuanji will be more useful in the Ministry of War than in the Political Affairs Hall. I have come to the capital for this matter. Chapter 656. Some things did not need to be said too clearly. Yao Chong understood why Zhang Jianji suggested him to stay in the Ministry of War. But the position of Prime Minister was the highest point in one's life. Unless one was a member of the royal family, the position of Prime Minister was the highest point of one's life. The temptation was huge. Now that this goal was right in front of him, he only needed to work hard to climb up. It was not easy for him to give up. But Yao Chong only stroked his beard and pondered for less than 10 minutes before he suddenly opened his eyes. He had made up his mind, and his eyes were clear. He said in a sonorous tone, "The position of Prime Minister is something people yearn for." But during the Wujia Revolution, the Wu clan monopolized power and acted arrogantly. Now that the Empress is on the throne, although the court is not peaceful, the world is still stable. Once the Empress passes away, the power will fall into the hands of the Wu clan. Chaos will follow, and the empire will collapse in an instant. Without the country, what is the use of being prime minister? Since the position of assistant minister of war is beneficial to the restoration of the empire, it is not a big deal for me to give up this position. Good. Duke Wen clapped his hands and praised. I knew that Yuanji's heart is for the world and will definitely agree. Don't worry. With your qualifications and reputation in the court, you will enter the government hall sooner or later. It is just that you will enter 2 years later, but you will be able to cultivate many useful talents in the army. If there is a big change in the future, this will be the capital for us to restore the empire. The Duke Wen that Yao Chong spoke of was Yang Yuanyan, courtesy name Wen. He was the provincial governor of Jing province and a like-minded friend of Zhang Jinji. This time, Zhang Jinji was transferred to the provincial governor of Jing province. The original provincial governor, head of officials, and other officials were transferred. Yang Yuanyan was also transferred back to the capital recently. Therefore, he brought back Zhang Jinji's views on the current situation. Yang Yuanyan excitedly poured a cup of wine for Yao Chong and raised his own cup. He said, "Today, in order to restore Li Tang's empire, I am willing to give up my fame and future. On behalf of Li Tang's old officials and the people of the world, I propose a toast to you. Please drink. Cheers." In another mansion, in another study, there were also 2 people sitting opposite each other. The food and wine were simple. The master was wearing a swallow residence robe. His face was thin and his temperament was refined. He looked to be less than 60 years old. His complexion was excellent and his face was ruddy. His eyebrows were very thick, but they were very thick at the beginning, very light in the middle, and very thick at the end, giving his refined air a slight air of malice. This person's name was Yang Zaisi. After he passed the imperial examinations, he first became a military official. Later, he was promoted to the position of external minister of heavenly officials. He worked in the Ministry of Appointments for a few years, and his achievements were remarkable. Especially because he was smooth and slick, he was good at making friends. Soon, he was transferred to Luantai. Like Yao Chong, he was also one of the most popular candidates after Li Zhaoda stepped down. However, with a strong competitor like Yao Chong, he only had half a chance. Unexpectedly, someone came to visit and brought him great news. They are willing to elect Yang Zaisi as prime minister. There was only one person, but he represented a group of people. This group of officials did not take a clear side. They did not have much power, but their positions were high. Their words were very effective. To these people, remaining neutral was also a way to protect themselves. Therefore, Yang Zaisi couldn't figure out what they wanted in return for their help. If the other did not say what they wanted in return, the crafty Yang Zaisi would not easily agree to their help. Yang Zaisi parted his beard and restrained a smile. He asked solemnly, "Let's not beat around the bush. Everyone is willing to help me. But what do you want me to do?" "It's very simple. Do one thing and help one person." The person smiled. There was only one lit lamp in the room. It was placed behind him to the right, so his face was hidden in the light. It gave him a mysterious feeling. Brother Yang knows that there is a scandal in the selection of officials in the southern frontier. His Majesty has lost all face. How to smoothly resolve this matter concerns His Majesty's face, as well as the dignity of the court. If Brother Yang becomes the Prime Minister, the 3 fires of a new official must burn brightly no matter what. When that time comes, What better way to prove Brother Yang's ability and boldness than to smoothly resolve the matter in the southern frontier? The person sighed softly. Brother Yang should know that Zhao Gan's impeachment this time is against Yang Fan, but King Yang is behind him. This matter is difficult for His Majesty. Zhao Gan only accused Yang Fan, but each and every one of the cases were scandals of officials abusing their power for personal gain. If they were to be pursued one by one, who knows how many people would be implicated, and the prestige of the imperial court would be reduced to nothing. Thus, it is best to put this matter aside for now. The most important thing is to quickly come up with a list of candidates that will satisfy all parties. This way, no one will care about the problems with the original list. The emperor will be satisfied, the officials will be at ease, and Brother Yang's reputation will be established. The person smiled. The one who is in charge of the overall situation is in line with the emperor's will and the officials' hearts. The right time, the right place, and the right people are all in place. This is a rare opportunity for Brother Yang. Yang Zaisi lowered his head again. He pretended to sip his wine as he thought about it. He thought about the famous officials who were willing to stand out to support him. They all seemed to have relatives, nephews, or disciples involved in Yang Fan's list. It was reasonable for them to be eager to resolve this matter. However, Yang Zaisi felt that things were not as simple as the other party made them out to be. Yang Zaisi pondered for a long time before he raised his head and asked, then to help a person, "Who is this person?" The person replied, "Zhao Gan." Yang Zaisi's eyes narrowed. A trace of surprise flashed through his eyes. The person sneered, "Who is going to clean up this mess? I wonder where this Zhao Gan got his hands on so many secrets of the officials. It seems like he's trying to imitate Zhou Xing and Lai Junqin, using shortcuts to climb up the ranks. But no matter what, there's no one more suitable than him to clean up this mess. Doesn't he know the affairs of the officials like the back of his hand? Then let him be the examiner. At that time, who will have anything to say? By using him, not only will we be able to seal his mouth and throw this mess to him to clean up, it will also prove that Brother Yang has never formed a faction and is wholeheartedly serving the public. His Majesty will surely be pleased." Hearing this, Yang Zaisi lowered his head again. Nominating Zhao Gan made sense. Looking at it from a closer perspective, it would allow him to achieve his goal of promotion. It would prevent him from imitating Zhou Xing and Lai Junqin, biting others like a mad dog. A few days ago, these officials were still desperately stuffing candidates into the candidate list. But now, they were all eager to avoid him. In the long run, it was not easy to become an official. No matter how balanced Zhao Gan's list was, he would definitely offend a group of people. It was still unknown whether he could become a lackey of the emperor like Zhou Xing and Lai Junqin, but he had already made a group of enemies for himself. This was a method to kill without spilling blood. But Yang Zaisi thought about it again and again, but he still felt that there was something he couldn't figure out. He pondered for a long time, but still couldn't figure out the other party's motive. However, he did analyze his own strength. No matter what, agreeing to it was beneficial for him. If he agreed to it, he would immediately gain a great help, giving him a greater advantage in the competition against Yao Chong. What happened next could only be carried out after he became the prime minister. If he became the prime minister and made this request, he would not only win the emperor's heart, but also preserve the reputation of these officials. From then on, he would be able to turn this request into his own connections. He would also be able to gain a good reputation of being selfless in the court and leave a good impression on the emperor that he was courageous, capable, and dedicated to solving the emperor's problems. No matter how he looked at it, he would not lose out. Thinking of this, Yang Zaisi raised his wine cup and drank it in one gulp. He slammed the cup on the ground and said in a deep voice, "Fine, let's do it." Wu Zetian returned to the inner chamber of the summer palace with a displeased expression. The recent series of events in the court made her very unhappy. Today, she specially came to the Dragon Gate Palace to relax her anxious mood. Who knew that Wu Sanxi would come to the Dragon Gate to complain about his grievances. Wu Zetian had no other choice. She could only climb out of the hot spring and change her clothes to meet her disappointing nephew. After listening to him complain about his grievances for a long time, she impatiently sent him away. It was impossible to separate family and state matters, so clearly this country and the world belonged to her. If Wu Sanxi and Yang Fan handled things beautifully and left others speechless, she wouldn't mind at all. But now that things had turned out like this, Wu Zetian felt a bit disappointed. Come. There was no one in the inner chamber, but at Wu Zetian's order, two slender figures immediately flashed out like ghosts and stood there quietly. Before Wu Zetian ascended the throne, the Plum Blossom Guards had many functions, including spies, guards, and attendants. But after she ascended the throne many years ago, the Plum Blossom Guards only had the function of personal guards. Now that the eyes and ears of the Three Law Bureau were almost paralyzed, she had no choice but to let the Plum Blossom Guards resume their old duties. Did Yang Fan make any moves? Reporting to Your Majesty, Yang Fan has been in seclusion these days. Occasionally, some colleagues have come to visit, but the highest rank is only 5th rank. Yang Fan didn't go to the Liang Palace, and he didn't go to Princess Taiping's residence? No. Wu Zetian waved her hand, and the two female guards quietly disappeared. Wu Zetian thought to herself, this Yang Fan is quite clever and knows his limits. He didn't rely on the fact that he was doing things for Sanxi and Taiping's favor, but he acted unscrupulously and went around asking for help, attracting hundreds of officials to attack him. He's much better than that bastard Shuai. Wu Zetian suddenly remembered the news that the Luoyang magistrate had just sent over. Shuai ran to the Luoyang prefecture and demanded 300 bolts of silk and 25 cows from the Luoyang magistrate. He even used the emperor's name, saying that he wanted to hold some kind of ceremony for her. The Luoyang magistrate didn't dare to refuse, but there was no one to report such a huge debt, so he could only report it to the emperor. Thinking of Shuai, Wu Zetian was even more vexed. This child Yang Fan seems to be quite clever, but why did he make such a mistake this time and leave so many weaknesses for others to use against him? He's still young after all, and once he succeeds, he inevitably gets carried away. This time, no matter what, I have to make him suffer, or else how am I going to answer to the officials? However, this matter has to end as soon as possible. I can't let Zhao Gan investigate endlessly. If he continues to investigate, it will be me and the Wu clan who will lose face. Suddenly, the sound of splashing water and Zhang Changzong and Zhang Yiji's laughter came from behind the screen. Wu Zetian's furrowed brows relaxed a little, and a trace of a smile appeared on her face. Now, only when she was with Wulong and Lulang would she feel carefree, and only then would she feel like she had regained her youth. As Wu Zetian thought about it, she gently unbuckled her belt and slowly walked over. Her steps were graceful, and she seemed to have regained some of the elegance she had in the past. When she reached the screen, her loose robe had already been quietly taken off. Chapter 657. Yang Fan stayed at home these days. In the first few days, his friends came to visit him, but Yang Fan was an idler now. Others were not, especially those in the military. It was not easy for them to come out. After a few days, the Yang family quieted down. Yang Fan took the chance to cultivate and spend time with his wife and son. Xiao Meng seemed to have no idea that her husband was impeached and his official position was about to be lost. She never asked Yang Fan about this. However, her baby son, who was always by her side, was now taken care of by a nanny. And Xiao Meng spent most of her time with her husband. Every day, she would carefully arrange 3 meals a day. The dishes were different for 3 days in a row. It was not easy in such a late autumn season. In this era, there was no big restaurant. Except for the royal family, few people could eat out-of-season dishes. The reduction of the variety of vegetables made it difficult for the dishes to change, which showed Xiao Meng's care. At other times, Xiao Meng would accompany Yang Fan to practice swordsmanship, play chess, and chat. Except when Yang Fan sat in the study and dealt with those things that were not official but obviously important, she would accompany her baby son. Anu did not ask Yang Fan about the closed-door hearing. This kind of thing could not be solved even if she asked. It would only annoy Yang Fan. She just behaved more gently than usual. Although it was not the wedding day and she and Yang Fan had not reached the last step, if Lang Jun wanted to take advantage of her, Anu would be as gentle as water and respond carefully. However, he didn't know if it was because Xiao Man often accompanied Yang Fan, but Anu was missing most of the time. Although Yang Fan was now at home, his plan had just begun. Whether it would succeed or not was the most critical moment. He was busy with these affairs all day long, so he didn't notice Anu's abnormality. At this moment, Yang Fan was busy in the study. There was a letter in his hand. The paper was as white as snow, with peach patterns faintly visible. There was a line of beautiful, small characters on it. If one smelled it carefully, there was a faint fragrance of high quality. It recorded in detail the Empress' words and actions over the past few days, as well as her happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy. Had found a way to send this out of the palace. After Yang Fan was impeached, Wan was the one he was most worried about. Although Yang Fan had revealed some information to her, and she knew that the person who caused Yang Fan to be impeached was none other than himself, Wan was still worried. She had been by the Empress's side for far too long, and was well aware of the Empress's ruthlessness. In her eyes, Yang Fan's act of playing with fire was extremely dangerous. Wan tried her best to transmit the Empress's every move out of the palace. She hoped that her Lang Jun could accurately grasp the Emperor's thoughts and deal with him more easily. Although Wan-er's accounts were only bits and pieces of the Empress' daily life, they were actually very useful. In history, many powerful officials were in contact with the inner court. They had powerful eyes and ears in the inner court. They could clearly understand the Emperor's every move, joy, anger, sorrow, and joy. That was how they were able to seek fortune and avoid calamity. Gradually, they became the Emperor's indispensable trusted aides. Yang Fan had his own sources of information. Of course, the information from these sources could not be as detailed as Wan-er's, but the information he had was enough for him to determine the Empress's change in mentality. However, this letter was a token of Wan-er's affection. He still read it very seriously, word by word. After reading the letter, Yang Fan took a deep breath. It was the fragrance on Wan-er's body. When he smelled that fragrance, he thought of Wan-er's graceful and enchanting body. He thought of her love for him as deep as the sea, and the lingering ecstasy when they met in secret. Recalling the fragrance, Yang Fan put the letter next to the candle and lit it. He watched it burn to ashes inch by inch. The information Wan sent was similar to the information he had obtained from other sources. It was in line with his judgment. He knew that because he had placed Wu Sansi in front of him from the beginning, he had found himself the best meat shield. The Emperor had no way to investigate this matter. In reality, Wan had been by the Empress's side since she was 14. She understood the Empress better than anyone else. She should have made this judgment a long time ago. However, this exceptionally intelligent little girl could not help but make the same mistake that normal people would make. She was confused because this matter concerned Yang Fan. Even if there was only 1 in 10,000 chance of danger, she did not dare to treat it lightly. Sitting opposite Yang Fan was a member of Wan-er's family. In terms of seniority, Wan had to call him cousin. His name was Shangguan Bolong. Wan-er had many ways to get the news out of the palace. After Wei Tuan-er's death, Wan had taken over Tuan-er's power. The entire inner palace was almost her world. However, this internal minister's all-pervasive eyes and ears were only limited to the inner court. Once the news got out of the inner court, if she wanted to send it out again, she would need someone to receive her. Who could be more reliable than a member of one's own family? In this day and age, The basic structure of society was made up of the family as a unit. The members of a family were bound together for good or ill. Even the law of the country did its best to protect this system. Other than rebellion, any other crime could not be reported by a family member. If one reported an elder of one's own family, the law of the country would punish them even more severely. This could be seen from the case of a mother-in-law beating her daughter-in-law to death that Yang Fan had handled earlier. The old woman's son and grandson did not dare to report her at all. Similarly, if anyone dared to report a family member, it would violate the basic morality that everyone in the world adhered to. In order to prevent such a person from appearing in one's own family, in order to prevent the basic system that maintained the family from collapsing, once such a black sheep appeared, regardless of friend or foe, everyone would despise and exclude him. No matter how big the world was, there would no longer be a place for him to stand. Because of this, the existence of the succession hall was so secretive. Because of this, when Wan visited relatives last time, she learned that Yang Fan had won the trust and support of the Guan Long family as the husband of the head of the Shangguan family. She was so happy that she immediately handed over all the connections and power of the Shangguan family to him without hesitation. Shangguan Bolong was a secret channel that Yang Fan and Wan are used to contact each other secretly. When there was only a little bit of the letter left, Yang Fan let go of his hand and watched it float to the ground and burn out the last bit of fire. Then he looked at Shangguan Bolong and said with a smile, "How is Zhao gone?" According to seniority, Shangguan Bolong was Wan Er's cousin, but in the Shangguan family his branch was a side branch and did not have a high status. So in front of Yang Fan he did not dare to be arrogant. Hearing the question, he quickly stood up and replied respectfully, "Zhao Gan is very famous now. Many people in the officialdom are talking about him. There are those who slander him, and there are those who praise him. In general, it is his good reputation that prevails. Sit, sit, sit. Brother Bolong, you are welcome." Yang Fan invited Shangguan Bolong to sit down. Then he smiled thoughtfully. "That's good. He has enough qualifications and status. The only thing he lacks is reputation. If we pave the way for him, then he will be popular." Yang Fan had already accurately judged Wu Zetian's state of mind based on Wan Er and other sources of information. As such, he could boldly add another chip to the equation. Yang Fan thought for a moment and said to Shangguan Bolong, "Tell them not to blindly impeach me. It's time to drag King Liang out and give him a beating. Otherwise, our empress will not be able to make up her mind." The next day, the target and intensity of the official impeachment began to change. Although the impeachment memorials had not clearly pointed at Wu Sansi, the voices in the impeachment memorials strongly requested to investigate the background of the selected officials and to strike the behind-the-scenes manipulator were getting louder and louder. Li Xiaoda was already a street rat. People in Li Xiaoda's faction were also being purged one after another. Needless to say, this wind was directed at Wu Sansi. In fact, similar memorials had already been written. How could Wu Qingxi let go of this good opportunity to strike his political enemy? He had already instructed people to impeach him. However, Wu Qingxi only had some achievements in persuading the common people to petition, persuading the emperor to grant him a title, and so on. His practical ability was far less than Wu Sansi's. For so many years, he had not established much influence in the imperial court. His main contacts were concentrated in those people within the Wu family. Therefore, there were not many officials who belonged to Wu Qingxi's faction. There were even fewer people who were qualified to speak on his behalf, so it was impossible to form a great momentum. Now, a new force suddenly joined in and echoed his voice. The voices demanding to clear up the manipulator behind the selection of officials became louder and louder. 3 days later, the empress, who was still relaxing at the Dragon Gate, suddenly summoned the 5 ministers Wang Xiaojie, Gu Zili, Du Jingjian, Zhou Yunyuan, and Yang Zaisi to the mountain to accompany her. She gave them the Dragon Gate, soup to show the emperor's grace. Among these 5 people, except for Yang Zaisi, The other four had the status of prime minister. The emperor's meaning could not be more obvious. The battle for prime minister was now settled, and Yang Zaisi had won. Coincidentally, on the day that the 5 ministers went to the Dragon Gate, the first snow of the winter came. The snow was not heavy, and it did not even completely cover the ground. As soon as the people and horses left, they quickly stepped out of the original shape of the road. However, the temperature in the mountains was lower than on flat land, and there were no carriages or people trampling on it, so there was a thin layer of white snow covering the gray mountains with a layer of silver. When the 5 ministers arrived in the mountains, they were first brought to their residence. There were hot springs everywhere. Although it was the first snow of winter, it was very warm here, because the 5 ministers had just arrived and were anxious to see the empress. They did not bathe for too long. They simply soaked in the hot springs, dressed neatly, and went to see the empress together. The empress was taking a walk near the hot springs on the mountain, and she only brought one air with her. Because there was an extremely hot spring here, this place was blessed by the heavens. In the winter snow season, the nearby vegetation was lush and green. When the hot spring gushed out and flowed downwards, there were wisps of white mist. It was like being in a fairyland. The 5 ministers were led by the eunuchs, stepping on the snow and passing through the mist. Gradually, it was like entering the spring wilderness. Regarding this wonderful place, they were all so amazed. Not long after, they turned around a clump of green and saw Wu Zetian standing under a flower tree, talking and laughing with one air. The 5 ministers were relieved. It seems that the empress is in a good mood today. Being with the emperor was like being with a tiger. Even if they were the most powerful ministers, they did not dare to get along with the empress, who was in a rage. The 5 ministers did not dare to look too long. When they came to the empress, they quickly bowed and said, "Minister Wang Xiaozhi, Guzili du Jingjian, Zhou Yunyuan Yang Zaisi, greets your majesty." "He, my dear ministers, you are here. There is a hot spring in the mountains, so the surrounding is as warm as spring, and the vegetation is flourishing. In this cold winter season, it is indeed a beautiful and wonderful place. My dear ministers, you have worked hard for the country. Therefore, I have called you here to let you have a good rest in this paradise. Your majesty is so caring. This old minister is grateful." The ministers all bowed and thanked him. Wu Zetian smiled and turned around. She broke a branch from the flower tree and held it in her hand. Looking at the blooming pear blossom on the branch, she said, "This place is close to the hot spring, so the vegetation is evergreen. However, the season is not right, so there are not many flowers that can bloom. Only this pear tree in this season is actually full of pear blossoms, which is quite strange. My dear ministers, what do you think the blooming pear blossoms mean?" Yang Zaisi did not even think, and immediately said, "The heavy snow is flying, the north wind is like a knife, but the pear blossoms are still blooming here. This means that your majesty's holy virtue can even feel the unintentional flowers, so it can grow against the time. Although Zhouwen, Wangda, and Xingwei are all good." The 4 prime ministers glanced at each other and thought to themselves, "This brother Yang really knows how to flatter." Oh, Wu Zetian glanced at the other 4 and smiled. "My dear ministers, do you think so too?" Du Jingjian's heart moved, and he stepped forward, saying, "According to the Hongfan's biography of the 5 elements, Yin and Yang do not interfere with each other. Blasphemy is a disaster. Also, the spring and autumn says, in winter there is no Yang, in summer there is no Yin, in spring there is no cold wind, in autumn there is no bitter rain. In such a season, all things should be withering, life should be withering, but here the pear blossoms are blooming. Yin and Yang go against the time. This is a bad omen. I think this is a warning from heaven." The others heard this, and their faces changed, but Wu Zetian still smiled and only slightly raised her eyebrows, saying, "Oh, this is a warning from heaven? Prime Minister Du, do you think that I have committed a crime?" Du Jingjian's expression did not change. He said, Your Majesty has entrusted the affairs of the state to the ministers. If there is anything wrong, then it is your fault. The Prime Minister is the head of all the officials, assisting the Son of Heaven, managing yin and yang, following the four seasons, following the well-being of all things, suppressing the four barbarian feudal lords, and supporting the people so that the ministers and officials have their own positions. Today, if heaven has given a warning, then it is your dereliction of duty. Wu Zetian threw the pear blossoms into the hot spring and watched as the flowers flowed away with the water. She lightly said, "The court is indeed in a mess now." The ministers were shocked. They all cupped their hands and said, "We have sinned." Wu Zetian continued, "Since it is in a mess, my dear ministers, as the Prime Minister, should seek treatment in time and share my worries." The ministers cupped their hands again. "We will obey your Majesty's command." Wu Zetian turned slightly, waved her big sleeves, and said, "All of you have worked hard for the country. Your hair is white. How can I bear to add to your mistakes? Seeing all of you today, I can't help but think of Li Zhaoda. Li Zhaoda is the Prime Minister. Although he has made mistakes, he has also made contributions. In such a heavy snow and cold winter, it must be even more difficult for him to travel all the way to Lingnan. I can't bear it. I want to summon him back to the capital to be the imperial censor. What do you all think?" The 5 ministers said in unison, "Your Majesty is merciful. Li Zhaoda will be deeply grateful." Shanghai Wanner's bright eyes brightened, her eyebrows raised in joy. "Your Majesty wants to tell the civil and military officials and Wei Wang to know when to stop. Even Li Zhaoda has been let off. How can he not let Wu Sansi go? Then Lang Jun will also." Thinking of this, Wanner's originally slightly lonely face immediately lit up, just like the newly bloomed pear blossoms, pink and fragrant, beautiful like snow. Unexpectedly, Wu Zetian's face darkened. She said that Yang Fan's character is also good, but this time he has slacked off in his duty. It is a crime. We must not let him go. Let him. Wanner's heart suddenly hung in the air again. Wu Zetian also seemed to be unable to think of how to deal with Yang Fan. If she did not punish him, she would not be able to explain to the court. If she punished him, he made a mistake again because he was working for the Wu family. Wu Zetian's eyes turned and suddenly saw the hot spring. She suddenly had an idea. Yes, let him come to Dragon Gate and be the hot spring steward. Chapter 658. There were a few officials standing alone at the foot of Dragon Gate Mountain. Up and down the mountain, there was a vast expanse of white. This was the 3rd snowfall since the beginning of winter. The earth was finally wrapped in a snow-white fur coat. The mountain pass was a place where the mountain wind whistled in and out. As a result, a few low-ranking officials in green and blue official robes and a few odd job workers in 2-piece robes stood there for a while. Then they tucked their sleeves into their bosoms and stamped their feet. Their faces were stiff from the cold. A middle-aged man in a green robe sniffed and stuck his head out of the mountain to take a look. A gust of mountain wind blew out from the valley and blew snow into his neck. The green-robed man shivered and quickly shrunk his neck. He said to an old man in a green robe, with a hooked nose and a face devoid of flesh, "Shui Tangcheng, the wind is too strong here. Why don't we go back into the mountains and wait? Our bodies are freezing." The hawk-nosed Tang Cheng's face had turned blue from the cold, and his muscles were stiff. He couldn't even make an expression. He only snorted coldly and stamped his feet to warm himself up. "Supervisor Su, if you want to go back, then go back. Don't blame your old brother for not telling you. Don't look down on our Supervisor Tang. He has King Liang and Princess Taiping on his back. He is a famous figure in the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Appointments. Who knows, one day he will soar to the sky. He will still be awe-inspiring, even if he has to squat in this ravine for the rest of his life. Ha ha!" Shui Tangqing glared at him and said coldly, "Someone who can control the Ministry of Justice and single-handedly defeat the censorate. You should think about what kind of ruthless character he is. You can't afford to offend him. Supervisor Su had been in the mountains for a long time and didn't pay attention to the affairs of the world. He didn't know as much as Xue Tangqing. When he heard this, he immediately became nervous. Our supervisor is so powerful. Supervisor Xue, tell us quickly. Who exactly is this supervisor? Xue Tangqing suddenly became spirited. He narrowed his old eyes and pointed forward. He's here. Su Zhanggu, quickly go and see if our supervisor Tang has arrived. Manager Su placed his hand on the awning and looked toward the winding procession of people and horses coming from afar. He muttered to himself, could it be that Supervisor Tang has arrived? Could it be that some noble person wants to enter the mountain to bathe? The group of people in the distance did not look like Dragon Gate Hot Spring. Supervisor Yang Fan, Lord Yang, had taken up his post. That group of people and horses, there were 4 carriages, surrounded by strong horses and valiant riders. There were more than a dozen imperial bodyguards armed with sabers and swords, escorting them. Looking at this ostentatious display and posture, it really did not look like a small hot spring steward. Su Zhanggu trudged through the heavy snow. Before he had gone far, the procession of carriages and horses had already arrived in front of him. A dozen or so imperial bodyguards with sabers strapped to their ribs rode alongside the carriages. All of them wore green satin arrow sleeves, lamb fur coats, fluffy white lamb hats, lambskin jackets, and woolen cloaks. They looked heroic and vigorous as they rode their horses. The 4 large carriages were all double-shaft oil-walled carriages, each pulled by 2 strong horses. Unexpectedly, they were moving very fast in this foot-thick snow. When the carriages neared, they saw that the shiny carriages had dark green carriage rims. The hidden nails, curtain hooks, and shafts on the carriages were all polished white copper, shining brightly. Looking at this imposing manner, Xue Tangqing also felt that this was definitely not the hot spring steward's arrival. How could a small hot spring steward have so many guards and attendants? Not to mention the other things, just the dozen or so imperial bodyguards were all dressed in fur coats. If they were not nobles, it would be impossible for them to buy such luxurious warm clothing for their attendants. If it was a newly appointed hot spring steward, then he had to welcome him. If it was a noble, then he had to welcome him even more. Xue Tangqing did not dare to be negligent and quickly led a group of attendants to welcome him. He bowed respectfully and said, I am Xuening, the hot spring steward of Dragon Gate Hot Spring. May I know which noble has graced the Dragon Gate with his presence? The curtain of the first carriage lifted and a person walked out. This person was dressed in a black fox fur coat and a gray rat cloak with a snow-white foxtail around his neck. There was a heater in his sleeve. He was tall and strong, and his facial features were handsome. However, because of his attire, he had the grace and elegance of a noble young master. He looked at the few subordinates and servants of the hot spring steward, who were as cold as quails. He politely nodded to them and said with a smile, I am Yang Fan. The cold wind is howling and the snow is swirling. Thank you for coming out to welcome me. Yang Fan. This person was really the newly appointed hot spring steward of Yang Fan, Dragon Gate Hot Spring. For a moment, Supervisor Xue, Secretary Su, and the others were speechless. If they continued forward, they would enter a valley. The carriages could not drive in, so they stopped at the foot of the mountain, and everyone could only enter on foot. Only then did Xue Tangqing understand what was in the 3 carriages. There were 2 pretty maids in the carriage. They were third sister and Tao Mei. These 2 girls were chosen to enter the Yang family because they were pretty. These few years they ate well and wore well in the Yang family. The 2 girls had grown into young ladies and looked more and more beautiful. In addition, there was a fat chef and 2 young disciples in the carriage. There was also a pile of books, kitchen utensils, condiments, bedding for the Yang family and their attendants, and other miscellaneous items. From the looks of it, it did not look like a new hot spring steward had arrived. Instead, It looked more like a son of a rich family on an outing. The colleagues of the hot spring steward really opened their eyes. As expected, this new hot spring steward was not a normal person. This kind of extravagance was similar to when the king of Hanoi, Wu Yizong, had come to the Dragon Gate to bathe and enjoy the hot spring a few days ago. With one word from Wu Zetian, Yang Fan, who was already a high official in the heavenly official's office, had fallen from the 9th layer of heaven to become a hot spring steward of the Dragon Gate under 6th grade. This kind of demotion was like lightning to people who had bright futures and were proud of themselves. Even if they did not collapse, they could not help but feel depressed. But for Yang Fan it did not matter. With his position as the sect master of Xian sect, so what if he could no longer be an official? Now that he was a small official, it was more beneficial for him to manage Xian sect. Otherwise, he would have to spend large amounts of energy each day dealing with government matters. Yang Fan joyfully went to the Ministry of Appointments to receive his decree. Then he went to report to the Sinong Temple, because the hot spring steward was a government office under the Sinong Temple. After all the procedures were done, he came to the Dragon Gate to take up his post. This kind of extravagance was not because of Yang Fan's intentions, but because Xiao Man cared for her husband. She was afraid that he would not be able to eat well, sleep well, or freeze or starve, so she had made many preparations. She made Yang Fan, who had just taken up his post, seem like a marquis who had come to the Dragon Gate to relax and play. At this time, Wu Zetian and the 5 officials had returned to Luoyang. Yang Zixi was officially appointed as the prime minister. Originally, Li Xiaoda had held all the power, and the other prime ministers were like decorations. Now that the court had redistributed the power of the prime ministers, Yang Zixi was in charge of the Ministry of Appointments and the Ministry of Works. Yang Zixi being able to manage the Ministry of Appointments was a result that was half natural and half human. The Ministry of Appointments was a department with real power that managed personnel appointments. Under normal circumstances, the prime ministers were naturally willing to manage it, but the most troublesome thing in the Wuzhou dynasty was personnel. The political struggles of the court had never been as fierce and frequent as the Wuzhou dynasty. The officials of the court were replaced more frequently than they were harvesting leeks. Every time it was because of the political purges and strife caused by the involvement of various factions, and even the Empress herself, so it was not an easy job. Not to mention now, there had just been a big scandal, and the prime ministers were even more reluctant to get involved. Yang Zixi had just become the prime minister, so who else could he give this difficult job to? However, Yang Fan was worried that something might go wrong. What if one of the prime ministers was blinded by greed and insisted on taking over the Ministry of Appointments? Therefore, he used all his power. If the situation did not develop according to his expectations, he would intervene and influence it. There had never been anyone like Yang Fan who had such great influence in the imperial court. Because of his existence, he could mobilize the power of the aristocrats of Shandong and the Guanlong families. He could also mobilize the power of Princess Taiping. These 3 huge potential forces were enough to prevent any changes. As a result, Yang Zixi naturally took charge of the Ministry of Appointments. Once the division of work was done, Yang Zixi began to repay the people who recommended him to the cabinet. He proposed to the emperor, promote Zhao Gan, the minister of enlistment of the heavenly official, to be the minister of merit. He will continue to be in charge of the selection of officials in the southern border. Previously, the scandal of the Wu clansmen trying to curry favor with the officials of the southern border had made Wu Zetian very passive. She was also eager to end this matter and restore the reputation, so she immediately agreed to Yang Zixi's proposal. Zhao Gan, who had been silent in the Ministry of Appointments for 10 years, was finally proud and had real power. Things were not over yet. Yang Fan's series of actions had even stirred up a huge storm in the court. All of his efforts were for this moment. Now his final plan had just begun to be implemented. Yang Fan followed the people of the hot spring supervisor up the mountain. The servants, maids, and cooks went to arrange Yang Fan's residence and everything he brought. Xue Tangqing and a few low-ranking officials accompanied Yang Fan, who had changed into his official robes, to inspect the areas under his jurisdiction and the matters he was in charge of. Xue Tangqing was called Xuening, Su Lu was called Su Lin, and the first person who went to greet Yang Fan was called Su Jinqiu. The hot spring supervisor only had one chief soup supervisor, who was now Yang Fan. There was also Tang Qing, his assistant Xuening, who was a lower than rank 7 official. In addition, there was one chief soup supervisor, one mansion supervisor, 2 imperial censors for palace supervisors, and 12 ordinary servants. Yang Fan was in charge of 21 people and 2 mountains. He was the most powerful official on the 2 mountains with hot springs. He was really awe-inspiring. Chief Soup Supervisor Yang, please take a look. According to the terrain of the mountains, the court has built 21 palaces on the 2 mountains for the use of the emperor and the nobles. Chief Soup Supervisor, please come this way. Yang Fan walked into a large shed built on the mountain and couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. He saw that the fertile soil inside was planted with many fruits and vegetables. Many of the vegetables and fruits that could not be grown in this season and could not be stored in the cellar for a long time were all planted here. The vegetables were lush green and looked even more fresh than Yang Fan's dark green official robes. Xue Tangqing saw the surprise on his face and smiled proudly. We, the hot spring supervisor, are not only in charge of the hot springs. Because there are geothermal hot springs here, the weather is warm, so we built tents to plant fruits and vegetables. These fruits and vegetables can be grown against the seasons and specially for the consumption of the royal family. Good, this is really amazing. Yang Fan nodded and pinched his chin. He began to think about how to get some fruits and vegetables for his wife and children to taste. Chapter 659. Xue Tangqing didn't know that the newly appointed soup supervisor was already thinking about how to steal the fresh and delicious fruits and vegetables. He excitedly led Yang Fan to continue walking forward. Hot spring supervisor, please take a look. There are spring, summer, and autumn seasons here, so of course there are abundant water plants. But even in winter, there is still fresh grass to eat. So, in addition to hot spring baths, fruits, and vegetables, our hot spring supervisor also raises dozens of imperial horses for the court. Look, over there is the imperial stables. Xue Tangqing led Yang Fan into the stables. A monkey was rolling around in the grass. When it saw someone come in, it immediately did a somersault and excitedly greeted them. When it saw Yang Fan's appearance, it was startled. It circled around Yang Fan twice and scratched its head, looking puzzled. The monkey's action of scratching its ears and cheeks was very human-like. Its charmingly naive appearance made Yang Fan laugh. Xue Tangqing also laughed and explained. The former soup supervisor Hua liked them the most. Every time he came, he would bring them some food. When they saw his official robes, they thought that it was soup supervisor Hua. When they came closer, they only recognized the official robes and not the person. How many? Is there more than one monkey here? As soon as Yang Fan's voice faded away, 5 or 6 monkeys sprang out from various corners and excitedly ran towards Yang Fan. When they saw that Yang Fan was not Supervisor Hua, the monkeys squeaked and cried out with a look of surprise on their faces. Yang Fan laughed. Soup Supervisor Hua raised these monkeys. Did he not take them with him when he left office? Xue Tangqing said, Soup Supervisor Hua only likes them, they are not his. Every stables needs to raise monkeys. We have more horses here, so we raised a few more. Yang Fan had no knowledge in this area and could not help but ask curiously, the stables need to raise monkeys? What is the reason? Xue Tangqing said, Tang Jian may not know, but the reason why the monkeys are raised in the stables is to avoid the horse plague. Therefore, the monkeys raised here are also called avoiding the horse plague. Monkey urine can prevent and suppress equine plague. Monkeys hang around in the corridors, and their urine is sprinkled on the horse grass. When the horses eat it, they will naturally be able to avoid contracting equine plague. This principle was mentioned in both the classic of the horse and the essential arts of the state of Qi. This was the first time Yang Fan had heard of it, and he could not help but click his tongue in wonder. Even though he had no knowledge in this area, Xue Tangqing had seen everything when he entered the mountain today. He did not dare to underestimate this new supervisor's ability, and after seeing his grandeur, he did not dare to slight Yang Fan in the slightest. Therefore, he treated him with the utmost respect and answered all his questions. Those monkeys didn't care how ostentatious Yang Fan was, or how capable he was. They only saw that he was wearing the same official robe as Supervisor Hua, but he didn't bring any food for them. Relying on the fact that they had the advantage in numbers, they surrounded him one after another. One pulled his robe, another pulled his sleeves, hoping that they would be able to find something to eat. There was a little monkey that was following behind the mother monkey, timidly tugging on its mother's tail. It looked very obedient, but when it saw the monkeys harassing it, it did not get angry. The little monkey became bolder, arched its back, jumped up, and unexpectedly jumped onto Yang Fan's body. In a short while, Yang Fan was surrounded by a group of avoiding the horse plague. From the stables came a burst of hearty laughter from Yang Fan. "Xue Tangqing, quickly go and get some food, or else I will not be able to escape. You monkeys, I gave you some face in you. Io, you little monkeys, how can you climb on my head? Ha ha ha." After the snow, the Luoyang Palace was like a palace made of jade. Every time this season came, the plum blossoms in the Hall of Fragrance were the most beautiful. So after Princess Taiping left her mother's bedroom, she went to find one, and they went to the Hall of Fragrance to admire the plum blossoms. The plum blossoms were in full bloom. The thick and strong old trunks of the plum trees were covered with fluffy white snow. The plum blossoms were proudly blooming in the pure white snow, their unique beauty. The soft and waxy petals were crystal clear, exuding a fragrance to the fullest. Under the old, twisted branches of the plum tree, Eunuch Gao put on his oversized cotton-padded jacket and sat on a stone bench with a cushion of prayer mats. Just like in previous years, he excitedly told the young eunuchs and palace maids who had just entered the palace about his hometown and the northeast. But this time there was no handsome military officer called Yang Fan next to him, carrying a big halberd, to interrupt and tease him. Beside him were his two adopted sons, Gao Jingang and Gao Lisher. Wan, and Taiping walked side by side under the plum tree, whispering to each other. These two were originally close friends who got along very well. Later, because Taiping discovered that the man she was infatuated with liked Wan, she burned with jealousy and used Yang Fan's difficult situation to force Wan, to leave Yang Fan. Thus a rift was born. However, as Princess Taiping did her best to remedy the situation and help Wan, create an opportunity to meet Yang Fan, and in the officialdom, Princess Taiping and Yang Fan had the same goal. Gradually, although she and Wan had not recovered the intimate relationship they had in the past, the relationship between them had greatly improved. The number of henchmen Wu Sansi can rope in is limited. He originally wanted to use this opportunity to arrange for all the people who had submitted to him but had no real power to fill vacancies. In the future, it would be much easier to transfer them back to the capital. He didn't expect to lift a rock and drop it on his own foot. Almost all the people he is most proud of are on this list. This time, almost all of them have been caught in one net. The more Princess Taiping said, the happier she became. Suddenly, she glanced at Wan Er's pale face without a smile. She thought that Wan Er was blaming her for only caring about destroying Wu Sansi's power and not thinking about Yang Fan's current situation. She hurriedly said, in order to restore Li Tang's empire, Erling did not hesitate to give up the position and power that he could easily get. The Li family will never forget his contribution. If the Li family can regain the world, we will definitely repay him. Wan said lightly, Erling did not do this for himself. Otherwise, the Wu family can give him what he wants. He would not take such a strange risk. I know, Erlang may not care, but the Li family cannot forget, Princess Taiping said resolutely. She couldn't help but laugh. The Li family had been hit many times over the years. Their power kept retreating, and they were on the verge of death. This was the first time that they turned from defense to offense. How could she not be happy with such a result? Princess Taiping said happily. This time, not only did Wu Sanxi's efforts come to nothing, but he also didn't get any benefits from it. Now he is jealous and resentful, so he keeps a close eye on Wu Qingxi. He is afraid that Wu Qingxi will get the benefits. Hee. With Wu Sanxi keeping an eye on Wu Qingxi like a hawk, Wu Qingxi will not dare to do anything unscrupulously. Since the Empress ascended the throne, the power that is loyal to the Li family has been gradually shrinking. This is the first time that we can expand. Erlang's strategy kills 2 birds with 1 stone. It is really admirable. On the surface, Yang Fan was trying to help Wu Sanxi, but in reality he was tricking him. Not only did he weaken Wu Sanxi's strength, but he also used Wu Sanxi as a meat shield to avoid being severely punished. This was Yang Fan's plan from the start. But once Wu Sanxi was weakened, and Wu Qingxi took the opportunity to strengthen, it would not be good. Because once Wu Qingxi became the only leader of the Wu family, he could integrate all the power of the Wu family. A united Wu family was far from the current internal strife, and it would be more beneficial to restore Li Tang. This was also within the calculation of Yang Fan, Duganing Ku, and the others. But after carefully analyzing the internal disputes of the Wu family and Wu Sanxi's character, Yang Fan felt that there was no need to worry about this. Because if Wu Sanxi did not succeed, he would definitely keep a close eye on Wu Qingxi and be the crab that said, "If I can't climb out, you can't climb out either." The Wu family had the Empress to preside over the overall situation. In the eyes of the Wu family, the world was destined to belong to the Wu family. There was no external threat more serious than the internal threat. So, Wu Sanxi would definitely do everything in his power to prevent Wu Qingxi from strengthening his power. The current development was indeed so. However, Princess Taiping did not know that Li Xiaoda was not the only fish in the pond to suffer in this matter. He had always been within Yang Fan's calculations. Li Xiaoda's political attitude, in the long run, supported Li Tang. But because he now held the highest authority as a subject, he was loyal to Wu Qingxi in the short run. As long as Wu Zetian did not die, he planned to continue maintaining the current situation. In this way, as long as Wu Zetian was alive, he would be the great prime minister, second only to the emperor and above millions. After Wu Zetian died, as the chief prime minister, he would once again preside over the overall situation and support Li Tang as crown prince. Then, in the new dynasty, based on his achievements, he would still be the great prime minister, second only to the emperor and above millions. This was Li Xiaoda's wishful thinking. Unfortunately, Li Xiaoda was blinded by greed and underestimated Wu Zetian's wisdom. Unless Wu Zetian decided not to pass the throne to the descendants of the Wu family, she would definitely make all kinds of arrangements before her death to ensure that the descendants of the Wu family could smoothly inherit the throne. At that time, he would not be able to do anything about it. Li Xiaoda had already changed from a great help to Li Tang to a great obstacle to Li Tang. Eradicating him was an inevitable choice. Now that Li Xiaoda had fallen, Wu Sanxi had suffered a grievous loss. After suffering a grievous loss, Wu Sanxi had taken the initiative to target Wu Qingxi. Now, the aristocratic families could do whatever they wanted. As long as the aristocratic families acted discreetly and had a long-term vision, they would not be eager for quick success. They could easily find out that they were descendants of aristocratic families with a simple investigation. The southern border selection of officials would definitely have a happy ending. Zhao Gan, whom the Dugu family had cultivated for 10 years and endured for 10 years, would also grow into an extremely capable representative in the court. Once these officials who were loyal to Li Tang and had aristocratic family backgrounds filled the southern border, They could at least ensure that the southern border would not fall into chaos if anything happened in the capital. With the southern border as an example, if any of the other feudal officials wanted to fish in troubled waters, they would inevitably have to think twice and think twice. If the anti-Wu coup in the future did not succeed, with the southern border as a base, they could also protect the crown prince to seek refuge in the southern border. There, they could set up a new court and confront the Wu family's court in the north. They could use the identity of the legitimate Li Tang to command the world and restore the country. This time, the second Zhang did not suffer any losses. Instead, because of Li Xiaoda's fall, they took the opportunity to expand their power. But this could not be helped. From the beginning, the second Zhang did not care about the vacancies in the southern border. Their goal had always been the court. So this time, the southern border selection scandal could not drag them into the water, and the same method could not be used again. This was the only regret of this political struggle. Princess Taiping carefully analyzed the situation. The more she spoke, the happier she became. She did not care whether Wan Er liked it or not. The reason why she told Wan Er all this was because she had hurt Wan Er in the past. On the night of the Tianshu ceremony, she finally achieved her long-cherished wish in the golden grain garden. Her jealousy faded a little. Thinking that Wan Er was more important than her in Yang Fan's heart, she wanted to eliminate the grudge between them. Common secrets could bring people closer. Frequent contact would also make it easier to eliminate estrangement. Unfortunately, Wan Er did not know what she was planning. Listening to her talk about the things she and Yang Fan had done together, Wan Er smiled faintly, but in her heart, she felt sour and uncomfortable. I know you are sincerely showing off to me. Do you think you are involved in a lot of his secrets? Che, you will never know that there is a Xianzong in this world, and he is the sect leader. She is the woman who shares the most secrets with Erlang. Chapter 660. I understand now. Ha ha ha. I finally understand now. Ha ha. Young Master Jiang was like Zhuge Liang, who had calculated everything and was almost devilishly intelligent. He had thought through Yang Fan's entire plan, but unfortunately it was only after the fact. Wu Jiong has been tricked by him. Wu Sansi has been tricked by him. Wu Qingxi has been tricked by him. Even Li Xiaoda has been tricked by him. Ha ha ha! With such an opponent, this young master's defeat is not an injustice. Yuan Tingyin stood outside the barrier door and listened to his young master's somewhat crazy laughter. His face was full of worry. The fat, wet nurse carried the tightly wrapped little girl and tiptoed to his side. She said in a low voice, "Steward Yuan, are we leaving this place?" Yuan Tingyin saw that she was also dressed for traveling and said in annoyance, "Stupid! I only told you to prepare. Whether we leave or not is up to the young master. Why are you already packed? Let's go back." The young master had lost, and Yang Fan had successfully completed his mission. If this matter had been completed by Yang Fan, young Master Jiang could only act behind the scenes. For example, he could use the people on his list that were clearly inclined towards the aristocratic families to warn the emperor's lackeys. Then he could drink and watch the show. But now, this matter was no longer so easy to accomplish. This was because Yang Fan's methods were too secretive. It seemed that a careless reminder would not be effective. If it was deliberate, it would be easy for others to find out that he was the one behind it. Then he would be offending all the aristocratic families on behalf of the Lu family. Most importantly, Yang Fan had already cleared his name. He was now only the supervisor of the Dragon Gate hot spring soup department. These matters had nothing to do with him. Young Master Jiang could do things that harmed others to benefit himself, but he was too lazy to do things that harmed others to benefit himself, let alone harm others. He had lost. With things as they were, Yang Fan's position as the sect master was as stable as Mount Tai. Other than returning to seclusion, what other choice did he have? Yuan Tingyin was his confidant. He knew that the young master's power was lost, so he informed his subordinates to prepare to leave Luoyang. "Who's outside?" "Young master, it's me." Yuan Tingyun glared at the wet nurse and quickly opened the trapdoor. Young Master Jiang smiled with a sickly flush on his face. Seeing Yuan Tingyun and the wet nurse standing outside, he waved his hand and said, "Come in. What are you whispering about?" Yuan Tingyun hurriedly said, It's nothing. We were just chatting for a while. I didn't expect to disturb young master." Young Master Jiang's eyes were fixed on the wet nurse, and then he suddenly remembered. Holding the table, he stood up, stretched his legs, and slowly strolled to the wet nurse's side and looked at the child in her arms. The weather was cold, and the child was wrapped up tightly. Most of his face was covered with a camel wool blanket, leaving only a small gap. The little fellow was not idle either. A pair of big black eyes was trying hard to look out from the gap. When young Master Jiang poked his head out, the little fellow's eyes were fixed on him. Young Master Jiang smiled and stretched out a white finger to push the soft blanket away a little, and said, "Why are you wrapped up so tightly? You're suffocating the child." The wet nurse nodded repeatedly. Young Master Jiang looked at the little fellow's pink and jade-like face with a smile, and said softly, "Chinu, your father is so powerful. I was beaten to a pulp by your father, ha!" Seeing him smiling, the little fellow also opened his mouth and giggled. Young Master Jiang stopped laughing, and with a sullen face he slowly bent down and said in a very soft but clear and powerful voice, "But no one will never make a mistake. He won this time, but it doesn't mean that he will defeat me forever. I will definitely defeat him. Chinu, just wait and see. I will definitely defeat your father." The little fellow already knew how to read people's expressions. Probably sensing that his tone was not friendly, the little fellow stopped laughing and looked at him with a frown, looking very serious. Young Master Jiang straightened his back and regained his graceful and noble bearing. "Take the child back to the room. We won't leave." The wet nurse did not dare to say more, and quickly agreed and walked out with the child in her arms. Yuan Tingyun hurriedly closed the barrier door and walked to young Master Jiang's side and said anxiously, "Young master!" Young Master Jiang's face was sullen, and he glanced at him and said, "Who allowed you to make the decision on your own? Did I say that I wanted to leave?" Yuan Tingyun said blankly, "But we are." "Your subordinate knows his mistake." Young Master Jiang snorted heavily and said, "I was confused by dissatisfaction, resentment, hatred, and perhaps a little jealousy. This time, Yang Fan did a good job, and I accept my defeat wholeheartedly. It's not an injustice for me to be defeated by him. Those dissatisfaction, those anger have all vanished, and I am very clear-headed now." Young Master Jiang slowly paced in the room, 1 foot at a time, slowly and forcefully. After a few steps, he slowly stood up and looked up at Chengchen on the roof for a long time, and said in a low voice, "I need money to expand my contacts in the officialdom, and I need money to hire Jianghu geniuses to work for me. I need money even to inquire about information and bribe people." He took a deep breath and said, "I have no face to ask for help from my family. Now that things have come to this, I am afraid that my family will not invest in me anymore. I need my own source of funds. How many businesses are under my control now?" Yuan Tingyun composed himself and answered, "We rushed back to Chang'an first and saved some properties, and a large sum of money." Young Master Jiang interrupted, "Eating away the mountain." Yuan Tingyun hurriedly said, No, now the money has been turned into businesses with little capital but great profits. Taoist Sifang, the old nun from Hanoi, and that barbarian Moliai are deeply favored by the Empress, and these people love money as much as their lives. Now our businesses are affiliated with them, and with their power we are successful in every endeavor. Back then, Lu Boyan had already told young Master Jiang that the 3 living immortals that the Empress worshipped as gods were, in fact, a few Jianghu liars. Later, because these people were deeply favored by the Empress, Young Master Jiang felt that it was profitable and once sent people to contact them and successively affiliated some businesses under their names. As a result, young Master Jiang also learned more and more about these people. The old nun from Hanoi, who was said to be able to predict the past and the future and only ate 3 grains of rice a day, often ate fish and meat. He was very clear about this. After the old nun from Hanoi had the privilege of giving precepts and accepting disciples, as long as there was filial piety given to her, she would shave people's tonsure and give out tonsure cards regardless of good or bad. As a result, many prostitutes and brothels, in order to avoid taxes and hide their wealth, also became her disciples, so that there was a foul atmosphere in the sect. Young Master Jiang was also very clear about this. Another example was Taoist Sifang, who did not return to his place and abused his power everywhere, as well as that barbarian Moliai who amassed wealth and accepted gifts. However, these things had nothing to do with him. He only knew that with the power of these people his goods could be unimpeded, even if they were contraband goods. Not only did he not need to pay taxes to pass through the city, he could even use the power of the imperial court for transportation, and he did not need to spend a penny. Now he was in desperate need of money, and cooperating with these 3 swindlers was the fastest way to make money. He almost invested all his floating wealth into it to expand his businesses affiliated with these 3 swindlers. After listening to Yuan Tingyun's explanation, young Master Jiang slowly nodded and said, "Yes, with this, of course, we can't restore the strength that we had when we were in Xinzong, but after accumulating for 1 year, 2 years, at most 3 years, we will have the power to fight." Young Master Jiang suddenly turned to Yuan Tingyun and said in a deep voice, "This time Yang Fan did a good job. I am very happy because the person who defeated me is not an ordinary person. However, no matter how great he is still a person, and people will make mistakes. He can't win all the time." Young Master Jiang clenched his fists, not knowing whether he was saying this to Yuan Tingyun or to encourage himself. "Today I will bear hardships and gain courage, and in the future I will make a comeback." It was snowing in Luoyang and Chang'an. The pot of daffodils in front of the window bloomed, and a delicate fragrance assailed the nostrils. The small pink flower in the courtyard also bloomed, and it was as red as fire. In addition, Erlang did not let her down. With a wonderful game, he won the game, and Miss Ningku was very happy. Miss Ningku, who almost never stepped out of her room in winter, suddenly had the interest to appreciate the red plum tree in the courtyard because of her joy. So, the boat lady hurried to make arrangements. She first put on the 3 layers of clothing, then put on the silver needle sea dragon for a robe, put on the autumn board sable for a warm cover, and put on a crane cloak made of snow fox fur. On her feet, she wore a pair of small boots lined with deerskin and camel wool. She carried a warm hand warmer in her bosom, and around her slender neck was a large mink wind collar. The wind collar was wrapped around 3 times, and in the end there was only a pair of big eyes left on her beautiful and delicate little face. The originally slim and lovely body also became a clumsy baby bear. The baby bear struggled to walk to the courtyard and began to pant. After appreciating the red plum tree for only half an incense stick of time, the boat lady asked the girl to go back to the embroidery room. So Miss Ningku went back and then took off the Zhaojun warm cover made of autumn plate sable skin, the big mink wind collar, the crane cloak made of snow fox skin, the fur robe made of silver needle sea dragon skin, and the small boots lined with deerskin and camel wool. After that, she changed from a clumsy and fat baby bear back to a slim little girl, and her forehead was sweating. Ningka giggled, and she felt very funny. The barge mistress had been worried that she might catch a cold, that she might be tired, but seeing her as happy as a naughty little girl, her heart was filled with emotion. She felt that the girl, who had always been as quiet as an epiphyllum, could smile so happily, and it was all worth it. Just now, when Dugayu went to his little sister's room, he excitedly told her about Yang Fan's actions in Luoyang, as if he had seen it with his own eyes. The description was vivid and detailed, making his mouth dry and irritated. However, when he saw his little sister beaming with joy, Dugayu put in even more effort. He talked for more than an hour, putting in more effort than a storyteller. In other words, a storyteller. The supervising censor, Wang Zhu, had just arrived in Chang'an, and Dugayu was also one of the guests invited to the banquet. Because he was telling his little sister stories, he was almost late. After coming out of his little sister's room, he quickly went back to change his clothes. As soon as he changed his clothes, he heard from his family that the first miss, who never left her room in winter, went to the yard to enjoy the plum blossoms. Dugayu was shocked at first, and then became furious. His little sister was weak, and how could she withstand the cold? These servants were getting more and more outrageous, and didn't even try to stop her. Dugayu hurriedly ran to his sister's small courtyard, but when he reached the courtyard, his sister had already returned to her room. Dugayu stood outside the door, listening to his sister's light cough, but extremely happy and carefree tone of voice as she spoke to the boat madam. Unknowingly, his original anger dissipated. After a moment of silence, he turned around and prepared to go to the banquet. As he walked, he thought, how about, I let my little sister go to Luoyang next spring to relax? Although the mountain is high and the road is long, it should be no problem if she only walks 8 to 10 miles a day. Ah Ku has never left Chang'an. Chapter 661. Today, the Chang'an officials and nobles invited the supervising censor Wang Zhu to the banquet. Every year, the court would send supervising censors to visit the various prefectures. They were in charge of many things, such as governing the people, judicial proceedings, corvée labor, education, and so on. They rarely interfered with local government affairs, but they had the right to report everything they saw and heard to the emperor after returning to the capital. These special investigators were not high-ranking officials, but they had too much power, so the local officials never dared to slight them. This supervising censor Wang Zhu not only had the right to investigate the people's affairs on behalf of the emperor. His elder brother was the Renren of the Phoenix Pavilion and assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. With this relationship, the local officials naturally flattered him even more. This banquet could not be too extravagant, nor could it be bad taste. Chang, a magistrate Lu Zitian, had put in a lot of effort to make the banquet presentable, and the guests and the host were all happy. When the banquet ended, the feather-sized snow had also stopped. The whole city was wrapped in silver, and it was especially enchanting. Lu Zitian wanted to arrange for Censor Wang to stay in his mansion. Just as he expressed his intentions, Wang Zhu smiled. I appreciate Magistrate Lu's good intentions. But before I came, I had already written to Brother Ji about my itinerary. I said that I would stay in his mansion and sleep with him on the same floor, so that we can talk about parting. As he spoke, Wang Zhu pulled someone in front of him. Lu Zitian recognized this person as Ji Su, the Ming Tang commandant in Chang, and was the same as the palace commandant in the eastern capital, Luoyang. Although they were under the jurisdiction of Chang, a magistrate and Luoyang magistrate, respectively, their authority and status were more special. They were county commandants, responsible for law and order, but they were not responsible for ordinary markets. They were responsible for the palace. The imperial palace did not only include the imperial palace. In the places outside the imperial palace, there were the bailiffs, cleaners, coachmen, and cooks. Usually it was inevitable that there would be sneak attacks and fights. The Ming Tang commandant in Chang and the palace commandant in Luoyang were responsible for law and order within the palace, as well as criminal and civil cases. Now, Lai Junqin was Luoyang's palace commandant, and the Chang and palace commandant was Jisu. As Luoyang was the capital, Jisu was Lai Junqin's direct subordinate. Jisu was a resolute and taciturn person. In the circle of Chang and officials, he was not a very eye-catching character. He rarely attended banquets and social events, so Lu Chechen did not have a deep impression of him. He only remembered that he was a serious person and did not like to smile. He did not expect him to be so familiar with Censor Wang from the capital. Seeing his surprise, Assistant Wang smiled and explained, "Brother Ji and I have known each other for a long time. We met on the way to the capital for the imperial examinations. We went to the capital together and rented a house to prepare for the examinations. We passed the imperial examinations together and can be considered old friends." Ji Su held Lu Chietian's hand. It seemed that because he did not smile often, the muscles on his face were already stiff. His lips moved a little as a greeting. Lu Chietian suddenly said, "I see. Since Censor Wang and County Commandant Ji are good friends of the same age, then I will not be the bad guy. Ha ha ha. But Censor Wang is a guest from afar. As the host, I cannot be a good host. It is only right that I send Censor Wang to the Ji residence to show my respect." Assistant Wang thanked him profusely. Although Ji Su did not laugh or talk much, he knew that it was time to say something. He quickly said a few words, and Lu Chietian stopped. He held Censor Wang's hand and sent him out of the restaurant. Only when he and Ji Su boarded the carriage and left did Lu Chietian bid farewell to all the Chang and officials and nobles who attended the banquet. Everyone boarded their respective carriages and returned to their mansions. Ji Su was usually quiet in front of unfamiliar people, but he was always cheerful with friends of many years. He always had endless topics to talk about. He was a completely different person from his usual self. The two boarded the carriage and enjoyed the snowy scenery along the way. They talked about their own developments and encounters over the years and arrived at the Ji residence. The Ji residence had a courtyard with 3 entrances. Although it was not luxurious, it was spacious and solemn. It had the air of an official's family. After Ji Su returned to the Ji residence, he had to ask his family to prepare a few dishes and roast wine in a small red clay stove. He and his friends watched the snow from the window and chatted again. Before they knew it, it was night time. Ji Su was still in the mood to talk. He asked someone to spread a blanket for 2 people in the guest room, lit the lamp, and continued to drink and chat. By now, the two had finished talking about their developments over the years. Assistant Wang was talking about what he had seen and heard along the way. He smiled and said to Ji Su, "Brother Ji, on the way here, I happened to hear a rumor. It is said that the Luo Province Secretary General Qi Lianyao has the mandate of heaven. Qi Lianyao's mansion has the Qi of the king. Ha ha ha. People even say that Qi Lianyao has 2 sons. The elder son is called Deju and the younger son is called Xiaojue, which means 2 Qilins." Assistant Wang's tongue was swollen from drinking too much, but his voice was still clear. They also say that Qi Lianyao's Yao is Guangdi, meaning the ruler of the world. Don't you think that's ridiculous? Ji Su was startled and sobered up a bit. He hurriedly asked, "Did Brother Wang report this to the Son of Heaven?" "Ah, utter nonsense. It's nothing but a rumor spread by the common folk." Assistant Wang waved his sleeves and laughed. "Qi Lianyao is but a small secretary general of Luo province. The mandate of heaven? The ruler of the world? Laughable, laughable. How could I believe in such nonsense and use such supernatural things to confuse the eyes and ears of the Son of Heaven?" Assistant Wang slumped forward on the table as if he had lost the strength to drink. Ji Su rubbed his hands and said anxiously, "Brother Wang, you're muddle-headed. This isn't a small matter. As the ruler of the world, this is what I fear the most. Since ancient times until now, no matter how wise or heroic the ruler was, all of them would rather believe this sort of news than not believe it. Why did you?" Assistant Wang slumped over the table, snoring loudly. Ji Su nudged him and called out, "Good brother, good brother!" Assistant Wang was already in a deep sleep, completely unconscious. Ji Su laughed bitterly and stood up. He paced a few steps in the room and finally made up his mind. He raised his voice and called, "Come, help Imperial Censor Wang to his bed to rest." 2 manservants entered and saw Ji Su removing his robe from the wall rack. They couldn't help asking, "Ah Lang, aren't you going to rest?" Ji Su said, "Help Censor Wang to sleep first. I'm going to the study to take care of some official business." With that, he pushed the door open and left. The two manservants struggled to drag Wang Zhu up and carried him to the couch. They took off his boots and covered him with a brocade quilt. Because Ah Lang would come back to rest, the two manservants left a lamp on the table and then went out. Assistant Wang lay on his side on the bed, snoring loudly. He didn't stop after the two manservants left, but he opened his eyes and glanced at the door with a strange smile. He had known Ji Su for a long time and knew his temperament very well. This dear friend had a deep mind and would never take a wrong step in the face of trouble. Wang Zhu had long known that as long as he told him this rumor, Ji Su would not ignore it. Wu Qingxi dragged back a mad dog surnamed Lai from Tongzhou, wanting it to bite Li Zhaoda and Yang Fan. But this mad dog was no longer powerful. He had to make it the emperor's watchdog again. Only then would it be qualified to challenge Li Zhaoda and Yang Fan. So Wu Qingxi used the most effective method to make the emperor's aunt value this mad dog again. He knew what his aunt was most afraid of: rebellion. If he wanted to do something, he could only start with this topic. But now was different from the past. Ever since the southern border barbarians were almost forced to rebel by the cruel officials of the imperial censorate in the name of rebellion, the emperor had already begun to be cautious and vigilant towards the words of rebellion. It was already impossible to casually fabricate a crime of rebellion like before and really set off a turmoil. He needed concrete evidence to prove that there was indeed a rebellion. At least this time, there must be evidence. So he asked Zhang Jinren, who had been helping him refine the rejuvenation pill, to beguile Ji provincial governor Lu Sili, who believed in physiognomy and feng shui. Then, together with the bewitched Lu Sili, they tricked Luo provincial military adjunct Qi Lianyao. Qi Lianyao saw Zhang Jinren's godly physiognomy and Lu Sili, whose position was far above his, treating him with respect and truly treating him as the son of heaven. He actually began to believe that he was the son of heaven and began to secretly prepare for the empress' death and chaos. Now that things had come to this, Wu Qingxi was already prepared. However, he was still worried that there would be some oversight. Once the investigation was carried out, if it was traced back to him, he would lose the right to compete with Wu Sanxi for the position of imperial heir. That would not be worth it. Even if the investigation didn't trace back to him, he couldn't bear to lose his limited influence in court. So the informant couldn't be one of his people. Wang Zhu and Wang Lei were Wu Qingxi's people. The mission Wu Qingxi gave Wang Zhu was to find someone who had no connection to Wu Qingxi's faction and was qualified to report the rebellion. So he left the capital and chose his good friend of the same age, Ji Su. Ji Su was far away in Chang, and once this matter broke out, no one would be able to contact the king of Wei in Luoyang. To Wu Qingxi, this was a rare masterpiece of his life. Far-sighted, meticulous planning and meticulous execution. It could be said to be flawless. However, the situation in the capital was unpredictable. He didn't expect that before the mad dog Lai Junqian was released, Li Zhaoda would fall, followed by Yang Fan. Li Zhaoda was demoted to a county officer and exiled to Lingnan. He hadn't gone far from the capital and was still trudging through the snow. Then he was summoned back by the emperor's decree. He squatted at the censorate and became colleagues with the censors he used to order around like dogs. And Yang Fan was sent to the Dragon Gate to look after the emperor's baths, raise horses, and grow vegetables. The information was not synchronized, so Wang Zhu, who had just arrived in Chang and was completely unaware of the latest changes in the capital, he did not have the fast and efficient information channels of the Duga family, and he was still meticulously carrying out the mission that Wu Qingxi had given him. Once this news got out, it would set off a bloody storm in the imperial court. A bloody storm was about to come again. However, the bloody storm in the court had never stopped since the end of the martial year. Perhaps those officials who pursued power and wealth on the edge of a knife were already used to it. Chapter 662. Shui Tangqing of the Dragon Gate Hot Spring was holding a tin wine pot. He took a sip of Jiannan wine from the thin spout of the pot, then used his chopsticks to dip into the oily salted duck yolk. His face was beaming with joy. In front of him stood 3 men in green, their sleeves rolled up, their green robes tucked into their waistbands. They wore green bandanas on their heads, and their faces were filled with bitterness and hatred. Shui Tangqing closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and glared at them impatiently. He slammed his chopsticks on the table and said, "Why are you making such a bitter face? What's the matter? Say it." Marshal Su said with a bitter face, "Shui Tangqing, you are the oldest person in the Dragon's Gate Hot Springs. Apart from the chief supervisor, you have the highest authority. We have to ask you to make a decision for us." Shui Tangqing stared at him without saying anything. Marshal Su swallowed and said in a low voice, "Last night I saw our Chief Yang go up the mountain to soak in the hot springs. He went to His Highness King Liang's side hall." Shui Tangqing smacked his lips and nodded to the next man. "What about you? What's the matter?" This was Su Zhanggu. Su Zhanggu lifted his sleeve and wiped the sweat off his forehead. He stammered, "Shui Tangqing, yesterday something went missing in the vegetable garden." Shui Tangqing raised his eyelids and said slowly, "What is it this time?" Su Zhanggu immediately counted with his fingers. This lowly one discovered early in the morning that half a field of chives is missing. A row of shepherd's purse is missing, at least 30 cabbage. Some cowpeas and eggplants are missing. 2 ripe watermelons, 21 ripe golden peaches were counted the day before yesterday. But this morning there are only 16 left. Su Zhanggu said with a sad face, "Tangqing, we have to be on our guard. Even the horses in the stables can forget about stealing a single peach. Last night we lost 5. This is all for the emperor to taste. Even the princes don't have the fortune to enjoy it." Cough! Shui Tangqing covered his mouth and coughed. He said slowly, "Ever since our new chief supervisor took office, he has taken good care of us. You guys have also gotten a few jars of this Jiannan braised spring. Are they delicious? To tell the truth, if it weren't for the supervisor's reward, we wouldn't be willing to buy such a famous wine, right?" The people in front of him blinked their eyes and nodded blankly. Shui Tangqing continued, "Look, the fat chef at Supervisor Yang's house is really good at cooking. Ever since I've eaten his food, the ones we used to make are simply pig's food. Nowadays, Supervisor Yang doesn't eat all the food for himself. Every day he cooks for us." The subordinates vaguely understood. Shui Tangqing continued to patiently guide him. Early this morning, Xiaoxi and his brothers braved the heavy snow to deliver food to the imperial palace. Did Supervisor Yang reward them? If it was in the past, this would be your job. You deserve to freeze to death. Who would reward you? Shui Tangqing took another sip of wine. "That's why I said, Yang Tangqing is considerate of our brothers, and our brothers have to work hard as well. We can't let Yang Tangqing worry too much, don't you think? So this matter." Shui Tangqing deliberated and said, "If you're talking about stealing, I guess it was stolen by those horses. Those little fellows are very clever. We'll have to keep a close eye on them in the future and lock them up at night. This time, don't let Supervisor Yang know about it. Otherwise, Supervisor Yang will have to worry about it. All of you better keep your mouths shut, understand?" Su Lusher and Su Zhanggu turned around in a daze and left Shui Tangqing's room. Standing in the vast expanse of white snow, they momentarily forgot why they were there. Shui Tangqing sent them out and let out a long sigh, just as he picked up his chopsticks and was about to take another bite of duck egg yolk. He suddenly saw someone standing in front of the table. He jumped in fright. "Lu Rui, what are you doing here?" Lu Rui was a 16 or 17-year-old boy. Hearing Shui Tangqing's words, he wanted to laugh but didn't dare. "Tangqing, I have something to report, but I haven't had the chance to say it yet. Shui Tangqing let out a sigh of relief. Oh, what's the matter? Lu Rui said. Soup Supervisor Yang. Shui Tangqing's expression tightened. He hurriedly stood up and asked, What happened to Soup Supervisor Yang? Lu Rui laughed dryly. Soup Supervisor Yang's wife and child have gone up the mountain, Shui Tangqing staggered. Where are they? Lu Rui said sheepishly. They've already gone up the mountain. Soup Supervisor Yang is probably arranging their accommodation right now. You unlucky child, why didn't you say so earlier? Shui Tangqing became anxious. He rushed over and slapped the back of Lu Rui's head. Scram! Scram! Lu Rui covered his head and scurried away. Shui Tangqing sighed. It's rare for King Liang to come up the mountain. It's one thing for you to use his side hall to bathe in the hot spring. As for stealing vegetables, I can pretend that I didn't see you steal 2 vegetables. But there's only one golden peach tree, and it only bears a few fruits after being tended to like an ancestor. During the Lantern Festival, it has to be offered to the Son of Heaven, the Crown Prince, and the other princes. If you do this again, we won't be able to explain it to our superiors. Now, you've even brought your family here. What should we do? The more Shui Tangqing thought about it, the more he felt a headache coming on. After a long while, he finally stomped his feet and rushed out of the room, heading straight for Yang Fan's residence. Yang Fan brought Xiao Man, his son, and Anu to the Dragon Gate. He stayed here for a few days. He had nothing to do every day, and he was as carefree as an immortal. When he was full, he would go to watch the snow. When he was tired, he would go to the greenhouse to look at the fruits and vegetables. After some practice, he came to the scientific conclusion that green was more pleasing to the eye. Every morning, afternoon, and night, he would go to the hot spring. The location of the hot spring was different. Sometimes it was assigned to the crown prince's bedroom. Sometimes it was assigned to the prince's bedroom, and sometimes it was assigned to the princess's bedroom. He felt that they were all about the same. At most, the size of the hot spring pool was a little different, and the decorations in the rooms were different. After a few days, suddenly one day, he stroked his skin, which had become unusually smooth because of the hot spring. Then he looked at his third sister, and Lu Mei, who had become more beautiful because of the hot spring. Suddenly, he felt that Xiao Man and Anu would also like hot spring baths, and maybe Nianzu would also like it. Since there were benefits, of course, it should be enjoyed by the whole family. It was not the style of a head of a family to only bring back some fruits and vegetables for the family. So, Yang Fan waved his hand and sent a guard back to bring back the whole family. Of course, he would never admit that the reason he wanted to bring his wife here was because he had cultivated his mind and body in this paradise. His energy was too exuberant, so when he saw that silly little girl third sister, he was a bit tempted. Now the whole family had arrived. Yang Fan, holding his precious son, was excitedly leading Xiao Man and Anu to tour his kingdom. He had just brought the whole family to the greenhouse where the fruits and vegetables were grown. When they came out from inside, there was one less ripe golden peach on the tree. Now, Yang Nianzu was lying comfortably in his father's arms, waiting for his mother to chew the peach and pass the delicious peach juice to him. Touch it and see, it's smooth. Hee, I found it on the first day. It's really strange. When you soak in the hot spring, your skin is so smooth, as if it's covered with a layer of talcum powder. You'll know after soaking in it. As Yang Fan spoke, he had already walked to the side of the stable. Forget about it here. The royal horses are raised here, and the stables don't smell good. Let's... Yang Fan didn't expect that the monkey spirits would be familiar with his voice, since he had brought snacks for the horse plagues to satisfy their cravings. When he spoke outside, the horse plagues who heard his voice ran out one after another. They were so happy that they scratched their ears and cheeks and squeaked. I didn't bring food today. Go, go, go. Go far away. As Yang Fan spoke, he carried his son and left. Unexpectedly, the monkeys didn't react, but the little ancestor of the Yang family didn't have it. Since the monkeys came out of the stable, Yang Nianzu, who was lying in Yang Fan's arms, stared at the monkeys with his eyes wide open. As soon as Yang Fan turned around and left, the little guy immediately opened his mouth and tears rolled down. Yang Fan was angry and amused at the same time. He could only turn around with his son in his arms and said, "Hey, hey, hey, I'll show you, don't cry." The child's tears came and went quickly. When he saw the monkeys again, Yang Nianzu immediately stopped crying. He was still sobbing, and his mouth was open to the root of his ears. Xiao Man's face gradually returned to its former beauty, but it was a little more plump and charming than before. There was a faint smile on her face. Since Lang Jun was sent to the Dragon Gate supervisor, I was only worried that Lang Jun would be depressed. Lang Jun is broad-minded. I am relieved that you can be so happy. Yang Fan straightened his son up so that he and the monkeys could look at each other. He smiled at Xiao Man and said, "Do you think I'm finding joy in hardship? Hee, you don't know how comfortable I am. This kind of life is comfortable. Look, your son likes it too. As long as it can make my son happy, what's wrong with being an official who raises monkeys?" As he said this, a guard in green came from afar and stood beside him. Yang Fan glanced at him and handed the child to Xiao Man. He said, "Here, you carry him. Be careful, the monkeys are mischievous. Don't scratch Nianzu." Yang Fan handed the child to Xiao Man and walked towards the man. When he was near, the man immediately said, "Sovereign." Yang Fan waved his hand and led him to the side. He asked in a low voice, "Have you found those artists?" When Yang Fan was touring the east and west cities in Chang, and he saw some acrobats performing similar illusions to Taoist Sifong and the old nun of Hanoi. At that time, he tipped them a little more and asked them about their skills. He knew that they had a master who was better at illusions than them. It was just that their master was also traveling the world, and he didn't know where she was at this time. Yang Fan kept this matter in mind at that time. He told Dugiyu to contact these artists and find their master, and invite them to Luoyang with a lot of money. Yang Fan wanted to expose the tricks of the three swindlers and use this opportunity to cut off young Master Zhang's last breath of life. Then he not only had to get the evidence of the three swindlers corrupting the moral code and collecting ill-gotten wealth, but more importantly, he had to expose their tricks. Otherwise, the Empress would be their biggest umbrella. If they didn't fall, how could he cut off young Master Zhang's last hope? This man in green was ordered to stay in Chang and to wait for news. As soon as he saw him, Yang Fan knew there was a result. The man in green said, "The head of the Digu clan has found their ancestor and invited the capable person from Jianghu. Now they are on the way to Luoyang. I came first to report to the sovereign so that you won't be anxious." Hearing this, Yang Fan suddenly became excited. When he was in danger, young Master Jiang held back and didn't jump out. When he was sent to the Dragon Gate to be a steward who watched the spring, raised the circus, and guarded the mountain, young Master Jiang still held back and didn't jump out. It seemed that after suffering so many losses, young Master Jiang's arrogance had been greatly reduced. If young Master Jiang hid deep in the earth, even if Yang Fan had the ability to reach the sky, he wouldn't be able to find him. Naturally, he wouldn't be able to save his daughter. But this time, if his tail were to be chopped off, would he be able to endure it?